All right. Hello, and welcome to the Adaptation podcast, the one and true chapter by chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I am one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Breaded Beefish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 96th episode of the Nauticast titled The Favorite Child, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Theon 2, in which Theon Greyjoy keeps his streak of humiliating family reunions alive. Never going to break that streak at any point in A Song of Ice and Fire, is he?
There are a few things more pleasurable than watching a man dig his own richly deserved grave, and that's what this chapter is.
It is, but you get just a teeny tiny small sliver of sympathy and pity for Theon by the end of it.
A kernel of humanity. I'll give him that.
A kernel, just one small, very, very small kernel. So, as always, this episode is brought to you by our small council, our Hand of the King Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Mark N, Lord Travis, Master of Ships and War of the Waves, Sir Keith J, Master of Whispers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Jancy O, Lady Commander of the Night's Watch, Lord Jean, Master of Coin, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, Ward of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet the Other Woman and Mistress of Whispers, Lord Micah, Warden of the West and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gem that was promised, the High Bearded Priest, Lord Jake, Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Xena Valyrian, Hedrigal, Captain of the Airship Arrogance, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, one of the Eastern Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Anonymous, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, a priest of the drowned god, the King's Cook, Noli Oli, Master of Cannoli, Sir Sorsadelica, Prince Matthew of House Targaryen, proud soy boy of Summerhall, defender of the Fifth Book, and swing dancer with dragons. Hold on, guys. Scrolling down. Sir K.W. Dent, LC of the Blackwood Guard and Batman of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Pension for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Rainbow Commander of the They D's and Gentle Thems. Did I get that right now at this time? Okay, excellent. We were talking about that pre-production. I was fucking that up for the past couple times. Sorry about that, Alex. Lord Quinn Esquire, Master of Absolutely Positively Not, serving as a spy for several unnamed High Lords and Ladies in order to further the secret Blackfire-style conspiracy to overthrow the oppressive small council. Haldivar, the waiter for Tiwau, A.A. Ron Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crow's Eye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, and finally, Veneris of House Colgarian, the first of her name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overworked, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee of the Great Game of Thrones, Portraitess of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blender Paints, and Maker of Drawings. Thank you to our counselors very, very much.
Thank you, counselors, as always.
And our spoiler weeks, it's all in all episodes. We'll potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 decade novellas, histories, interviews, the Wins and Winners sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, the TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from Sir Courtenay, what did the Five Fingers say to the face Penrose, who asks, Garyon Lannister, where is he going? Where has he been? Is he the tattered prince? Is Bright Roar gone for good? Or is Tyrion going to find it somehow? What do you make of that, Jeff? Among the many missing persons lists in Westeros, what do you think's happened to him?
I have no real thoughts besides that he's dead. I think there's a number of thoughts that say that he's the tattered prince. He's the Shadow Lord who's on the run, whose name is suddenly slipping my mind. What's the one dude that's in charge of the Stone Men? That Tyrion has the dream about. Those originally supposed to be its own chapter from A Dance of Dragons.
Oh, the Shrouded Lord.
Shrouded Lord. There's that theory that exists as well. I think that he's dead. I don't think that we're going to see Bright Roar again. I think there's a thematic side of the Lannisters losing their ancestral sword that makes it really compelling when Jaime Lannister gives up the sword that they melted down from Ned Stark's ice. I think that's important for Jaime and his character arc, his development, and his relationship to Brienne, that he ends up giving up the sword that his father especially wanted to possess, a Valyrian steel blade. Tyrion Lannister and a lot of these characters that disappear all from the pages of A Song of Ice and Fire, that are especially disappear before even the start of the book series, you have to think about, like, in the reveals, in my mind, you have to think about them in terms of what is it going to mean, not just to the characters on page, but also to the reader, right? Not just the readers like us that are paying attention to a live stream or listening to a chapter by chapter podcast, but the casual readers, right? What's it going to mean for Tyrion Lannister to pop in? You're like, oh, I am Tyrion Lannister at long last. Here I am. The reader's going to go, who? Tyrion Lannister? And I think, like, there is a segment of the fandom which has looked at, the return of Aegon Targaryen as in that lens. But I think it's misplaced in terms of Aegon Targaryen. It's not misplaced in terms of Tyrion Lannister. He suddenly popped back on page because we'd probably be like, okay, what's he doing back in the story? What's his purpose in the story? I'm getting this look from Emmett, so I know that he has an interesting thought to share. So I will turn it over to you, sir.
Oh, I was just going to bring up young Griff, but then you did, because I think, yeah, that's the big exception to that rule. Is young Griff and John Connington are minor characters from the backstory who suddenly explode into prominence. But you can see a role for them, and in retrospect, you can see foreshadowing for it. With Uncle Jerry, and I don't think he's going to pop up back alive in the series. I do think it could be interesting if, like, yeah, okay, so Tyrion and Dany are going to go west at some point, maybe separately. Georgia said it's going to be a while before they interact directly. I could definitely see a scene in which Tyrion stumbles upon Uncle Jerion's bones and like has some sort of like, alas, Yorick, I knew him well kind of self-reflection moment. That I think could potentially work. And yeah, Bright Roar, up to this point, I think it absolutely has had to be kept off screen to lend that kind of tension to how the Lannisters deal with Valyrian swords that you mentioned. But given, that Tyrion is turning on his family, finding the bones of the one part of the family he still kind of loved and the sword that's emblematic of them, I could see it being a catharsis there. But that's it. I doubt it will have any more role to play. I definitely don't think he's the tattered prince. More than anything, he's just like George always has like this brother in these families, like the younger back talking one who's always cracking jokes. That's Benjen, that's Renly, that's Euron in a really dark way. He Jerry and supposedly went to Valyria. So I think that's more just what he is. I don't think there's a big payoff in the works. I think a mild one in service to Tyrion's character arc is the most I would expect.
Agree. I think we could possibly see a parallel with Tyrion reappearing, as well as George has said that the character of Tysha will be reappearing at some point, or rather, let me rephrase. George has said that Tyrion will, quote, find out where whores go in the Winds of Winter, whether that means that Tysha is going to make an appearance in Tyrion's arc. I'm not sure, but I think it's all going to be in service to Tyrion something or another in the Winds of Winter, George being ambiguous as he likes to do before the release of a book. And so we'll have to see what happens with him. So I can definitely see Tyrion being that same sort of reappearance in terms of in service to Tyrion's character. Not alive, but dead for sure.
So, thank you, Sir Courtney, for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions here on the Notacast podcast, you're welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron at patreon.com/Notacast, ASOIAF. And for all $5 and above a month patrons, we wanted to announce that our next Patreon-only bonus episode, titled Flag Day, in which we analyze some of the many ways in which George makes use of heraldry in A Song of Ice and Fire, and how all these colors run, unlike the red, white, and blue, is coming out in the final week in January. That episode and our 23 other bonus A Song of Ice and Fire episodes and 5 Fever Dream bonus episodes can be found again at patreon.com/Notacast, ASOIAF.
Absolutely. So I love the idea, and Emmett suggested this idea of doing this Flag Day episodes all about sigils and heraldry, which it's great because George definitely utilizes the ways that the banners are blowing in the breeze to communicate story. It's subtle and it's underappreciated, underexplored in the fandom, and we hope to give it a little bit of light. But enough about Patreon. Let's turn to Theon Greyjoy. When we last left Theon, he had arrived to the sound of white trumpets emanating from the White Tower, welcoming Theon back to the Iron Islands as the beloved son of Balon Greyjoy. Wait a minute, do I have that right? Where's my copy of A Clash of Kings? No, I'm afraid I don't have that correct. Sorry to say that, Theon. Let's see how Theon Greyjoy further beclowns himself in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Theon 2. Theon Greyjoy beholds his first and thinks she looks beautiful. But then a woman comes up to him and asks if he likes the look of her. He does, but he rather likes the look of the woman more. Ironborn, he knew at a glance, lean and long-legged with black hair, cut short, wind-chafed skin, strong, sure hands, a dirk at her belt. Her nose was too big and too sharp for her thin face, but her smile, oh, that made up for it. He judged her a few years older than he was, but no more than 25. She moved as if she were used to a deck beneath her feet. George, being the good Irishman that he is casually winding up the audience for the fun practical joke that he has planned for Theon. So much fun. The woman, though, plays, quote, hard to get with Theon. Is that correct? Is that what's going on here? But Theon insists on tasting her tongue. The woman asks Theon whether he's been long at sea and if there have been no women where he came from. Theon ignores the first question and focuses on the second. There were plenty of women in the Greenlands, but none like you. And how would you know what I'm like, the woman asks. My eyes can see your face, my ears can hear your laughter, and my cock's gone hard as a master. That's for you. Theon. Chivalry, not dead in A Clash of Kings, Theon 2. But Asha, oh wait, the woman gives Theon a bit of encouragement by going for a quick dick swipe on Theon. She admits that Theon wasn't lying about being #erect. She asks whether Theon's dick hurts, and Theon says, yes, it really, really does. But the woman, claims that she's wed and pregnant, so she can't help with any of that. Theon, extraordinarily charming, says that's all well and good. He can't put a bastard in her. But she demurs, saying that her husband wouldn't be too thrilled with Theon doinking her. No, but you might. And why would that be? I've had lords before. They're made the same as other men. Have you ever had a prince, he asked her? When you're wrinkled and gray and your teats hang past your belly, you could tell your children's children that once you loved a king. Let me pause here. I'm trying to imagine the scenario that Theon is imagining. Gather around, grandchildren. Grandma's brought cookies, and she's going to tell everyone about that time she fucked Theon. Yeah, Theon of House Greyjoy. The cookies are chocolate chip and still warm. The woman teases back that Theon ain't talking about love, and Theon thinks he likes this woman and says he'll name his longship after her and place some Wonderball on the high heart for her and keep her all up in a castle like a princess. The woman agrees, with Theon saying that he should name the ship after her. She built it, after all. She did? Yeah, well, kind of. Her husband, Sigrun, built the ship. By the way, her name is very definitely Eskrid. This gives Theon pause. He did know that Sigrun had a wife, but fuck it, Sigrun's just some barely not peasant. He only met the dude once, so he figures that Eskrid is wasted on Sigrun. Oh, Sigrun told me the sweet ship is wasted on you. Theon bristled. Do you know who I am? Prince Theon of House Greyjoy. Who else? Screws are being turned. It's awesome. Eskrid wants to know if Theon likes the ship, and Theon thinks about how new the ship felt underneath of him. Aaron Damphair was going to bless the ship the next day, and it wasn't a massive warship like his father's or his uncle's ship, but she was fast with a lean black hull 100 feet long. In other words, it's not about the size of the boat, it's about the motion in the ocean. He says that Sigrun's done a fine job and asks if the ship is as fast as she seems. Quite, Eskrid replies. It'd be faster for someone who knows how to handle ships. It has been a few years since I sailed a ship, and I've never captained one, if truth be told, Theon thought. Still, I'm a Greyjoy and an Iron Man. The sea is in my blood. And your blood will be in the sea if you sail the way you talk, Eskrid told him. I would never mistreat such a fair maiden. Fair maiden, she laughed. She's a sea bitch, this one. There, and now you've named her. Sea bitch. Eskrid's eyes sparkle, and she playfully states that Theon said he would name the ship after her. Theon grabs her hand and declares that if they'd gone to Bone Town, that it would be good fortune for him, or so they say in the Greenlands. This causes Eskrid to call him a liar. Besides, the Greenlanders didn't know anything about ships or women. Theon asks if he confesses that he was lying to her, that she'll love him, and Eskrid asks whether she's ever loved him. Ouch, Theon, you don't even know how bad you got burned there. All the same, Theon knows that Damphair will bless the ship the next day with seawater or some shit. But today, here we go. But today, Theon wants to bless his ship in his own unique way, with his cum. Amazing. Eskrid again demurs, saying that the Drowned God won't take kindly to all that, and Theon, a very cool college atheist with a YouTube channel, says he doesn't care about the Drowned God. He'll drown the Drowned God all over again if he bothers him. Besides, they're going to war. You don't want to let Theon go and fuck, do you? Well, Eskrid will fuck Theon, but just in a different way than he imagines. We'll get to all that soon enough. They go back and forth with flirtatious banter, and Eskrid once again slides a hand across Theon's dick. This causes Theon to invite her to another tall tower at Pike, but Eskrid has no horse. Theon offers his squire's horse to Eskrid, so kind of Theon, but she declines that too. So Theon says they can share the horse. Eskrid considers asking where she'll be sitting if they ride together, and when Theon says wherever she'd like, Eskrid says she likes being on top. Now, what does that mean? Okay, we're moving on. But then Eskrid agrees to go with Theon. So they head back to the inn at Lordsport, where Theon left his horse. Lordsport proves crowded with people, but then Theon notices something about the people. Ironmen did not bend their knees often nor easily, but Theon noted the oarsmen and townsfolk alike grew quiet as they passed, and acknowledged him with respectful bows of the head. They've finally learned who I am, he thought, and passed time too. Basically, everything's coming up Theon in this chapter. Lord Goodbrother had brought 40 ships into Lordsport the night before, and all the Goodbrother men were about the town. Eskrid asks if Theon had chosen his crew yet, but before Theon can answer, she calls down to one Skyrim NPC named Bluetooth, asking about his new wife. He reports that she'll have twins soon. When Theon asks if he should have Bluetooth for his crew, Eskrid says, no, don't do that. Bluetooth is already a captain of his own boat. Theon reports that Victarians loaned him Brimel Stormdrunk, another Skyrim NPC, his steersman, and Eskrid thinks he's an okay steersman so long as he stays sober. But then Eskrid is chatting with more and more people, and Theon comments that everyone seems to know her. Well, true enough, everyone knows and loves the shipwright's wife. All the same, Theon's at the point where he wants men loyal to him over Balon, Victarion, and of course, Aaron, damn hair. Eskrid suggests a few, and Theon humors her with thinking that he values her counsel. But seriously, bros, what do fucking girls know about boats, am I right? Hell yeah, no. The pair passes near the Mirror Him, the boat that Theon arrived on, if you remember from Theon's first chapter, and Theon picks up his pace, thinking about how Balon had forbidden any ships from leaving the harbor. But that's not why he's practically running away from the ship. My lord, a plaintive voice called down from the forecastle of the merchanter. The captain's daughter leaned over the rail, gazing after him. Her father had forbidden her to come ashore, but whenever Theon came to Lordsport, he spied her wandering forlornly around the deck. My lord, a moment, she called after him. As it please, my lord. No, it's the captain's daughter from Theon's first chapter, and Theon ain't pleased to see her. So he does what any good noble man does. He ignores her. Eskrid asks if the girl pleased Theon, and he says, yeah, I guess so for a moment, but she was kind of plain and dumb. Eskrid agrees to Theon's surprise. She just knows so much about what's going on in Theon's mind. But they finally come up to the inn where Theon had left his squire Wex. He goes in looking for the boy and finds him dicing and gambling. Theon tells Wex that they need to diddy Mao, but Wex ignores Theon until the, quote, prince grabs the boy by the ear and drags him away. Wex comes without complaining, and he really can't complain given that he's done with speech. Remember that? They emerge from the inn, and then Wex sees Eskrid. The boy's eyes go wide, and Theon wonders why he's acting so strangely. Yes, Theon, why? Theon orders Wex to saddle the horses. They're all riding back to Pike. Theon's horse, as it turns out, was a, quote, hell horse, according to Eskrid. He received it from Lord Botley, as most of the Ironborn didn't ride so well in the sparse ground as Theon did. But Theon, of course, had been raised at Winterfell, and he knew how to ride. Eskrid asks the horse's name as they mount, and Theon says it's Smiler, named for how Theon was told he smiled at all the wrong things. Eskrid gets up front and asks if Theon is smiling now, and yeah, he is. He reaches his arm around Eskrid to grab the reins, smelling Eskrid and noticing how she's nearly as tall as him, but he likes that smell of woman on her. They ride up to Pike. Theon attempted to cop Feels and Eskrid the entire ride up. It's really quite uncomfortable. Eskrid keeps pushing Theon off of her, warning him that his squire is watching. All the while, Theon talks and talks and talks. God, he never shuts the fuck up. He tells her about the Whispering Wood, and as he reaches the part about so totally nearly killing Jaime Lannister, he goes for another boob squeeze. Eskrid brushes his hand off and holds his hand to prevent him from going for more feels. Theon notes his hands are firm. Theon notes that her hands are firm. But then Eskrid changes the direction of the conversation. Tell me of your father. Will he welcome me kindly to his castle? Why should he? He scarcely welcomed me, his own blood, the heir to Pike, in the Iron Islands. Are you? She asked smiling. It's said that you have uncles, brothers, a sister. Pause. My brothers are long dead, and my sister, well, they say Asha's favorite gown is a chainmail hauberk that hangs down past her knees with boiled leather small clothes beneath. Boiled leather small clothes beneath. Men's garbs won't make her a man, though. I'll make a good marriage alliance with her once we've won the war, if I can find a man to take her. As I recall, she had a nose like a vulture's beak, a right crop of pimples, and no more chest than a boy. Yeah. Soak in that for a moment. It feels great, knowing what's coming in just a minute. Eskrid reports that Theon might have some power over Asha's marriage prospects, but he can't marry his uncles off. This is a sort of sore spot for Theon, as he remembers how the uncles, especially Greyjoy and Ironborn uncles, have a tendency of disposing annoying, weak nephews via murdering the fucking bejesus out of them. But I am not weak, Theon told himself, and I mean to be stronger yet by the time my father dies. Theon is a very, very strong captain, Dad. Theon is a very, very strong Kraken, Dad. Regardless, Theon knows that Aaron only cares about his god, and Victarion is strong but very fucking dumb. These are true things, but then Eskrid asks about the other uncle of Theon's. I've heard men say terrible things of that one. Theon shifted his seat. My uncle Euron has not been seeing the islands for close on 2 years. He may be dead. If so, it might be for the best, Theon thought. Lord Balon's eldest brother had never given up the old way, even for a day. His silence with its black sails and dark red hull was infamous in every port from Ibn to Asshai, it was said. But Eskrid thinks Theon might be dead, and given how long Euron's been away, the Ironborn would never seat him onto the Seastone chair. Crisis averted. We'll see about that. Theon thinks maybe he can grab another boob, but all this talk of his uncles has made him go from midnight to 9. He'll sex Eskrid as soon as they arrive at Pike, though. Theon tells Eskrid that he'll have her set in a place of honor at the feast, and when old man Balon goes night-night, he's going to come hang out with her for the rest of the night. Eskrid displays some sympathy for Balon, talking about how sad it is when great men grow old. But Theon thinks that Balon is only the father of a great man. Theon, in case you were had any doubt. Eskrid calls Theon immodest, which, yeah, and asks Theon what she should wear. Well, Theon plans to give Eskrid one of his mother's gowns, as she's always away at Harlaw and not coming home anytime soon. Eskrid says maybe Theon should go visit her. But Theon thinks that moms are always so annoying wanting to see their children. And Theon can't go anyways. He's just so very, very busy. He can't possibly slip away, even as his visit might bring her peace. And Theon's like, yeah, well, excuse me one more time. And Eskrid says, well, maybe her visit will bring her peace. And Theon's like, you sound like a fucking girl. And Eskrid agrees. She's very new with child and a woman too. This gets Theon's dick hard, and he thinks about banging a pregnant chick, but he comments that Eskrid doesn't seem very pregnant. He's going to need to see those boobs get big and ripe and drink the milk from them. Yes, George. Theon, we get it. You have a lactation fetish. This chapter. I love it, but it's this chapter. We then proceed to more banter between Eskrid and Theon, revisiting the topics of how Eskrid is Sigrun, the shipwright's wife. Eskrid encourages Theon to talk more about Robb Stark and the Lannisters, and Theon can't keep his trap shut. Finally, Pike appears ahead, and the pair races up to the gate. The hounds come running, and they bowl Eskrid over. She begins wrestling and laughing with them. The stableman comes out, and Theon orders him to take the reins of the horse, but he ignores him. The stableman's face broke into a huge, gap-toothed smile, and he said, Lady Asha, you're back. Last night, she said, I sailed from Great Wick with Lord Goodbrother and spent the night at the inn. My little brother was kind enough to let me ride with him from Lordsport. She kissed one of the dogs in the nose and grinned at Theon. All Theon could do was stand and gape at her. Asha, no, she can't be Asha. He realized suddenly that there were two Ashas in his head. One was the little girl he had known. The other, more vaguely imagined, looked something like her mother. Neither looked a bit like this. The pimples went when the breast came, Asha explained while she tussled with the dogs. But I kept the vulture's beak. This is the Thanksgiving turkey in the oven, levels of delicious smells. It's wonderful. Just waft that in. It's fantastic. Theon, in shock, demands to know why Asha didn't identify herself. Asha let go of the hound and straightened. I wanted to see who you were first. And I did. She gave a mocking bow. And now, little brother, pray excuse me. I need to bathe and dress for the feast. I wonder if I still have the chainmail gown like I used to wear over my boiled leather small clothes. She gave him that evil grin and crossed the bridge with that walk he'd liked so well, half saunter and half sway. Theon turns and finds Wex smirking at him. He clouts Wex dunk style in the ear for not warning him, even if Wex didn't have a tongue. He heads up to his chambers in the guest keep. Ouch, that Theon is in the guest keep. That must have hurt. And gets a good glass of wine for drink and thinks that he really, really made an ass out of himself this time. He drinks at the window seat and watches the sea brooding. I have no place here, he thought. And Asha is the reason that the others take her. Well, you kind of get partial credit here for Theon. You really don't have a place here at Pike. Not sure that Asha is the reason, though. Then he hears the music, gets into somber, dark and gray clothing to reflect his mood, commenting that he didn't have any fine iron-priced clothing as he only kills the poor. Lovely, Theon. Just your internal monologue is just amazing. And then heads down to the feast. He finds the hall smoky with 400 people within. Harlaws, Blacktides, Spars, Merlins, Goodbrothers, Saltcliffs, Sunderleys, Botleys, and Winches. Most of the major Ironborn families are present. Meanwhile, 3 Ironborn morons, because they are fucking morons, perform the figure dance, a, quote, game where the Ironborn throw axes at each other and try to catch them midair. It's called the figure dance because the dancers often lose a figure, or 5. No one really pays attention to Theon as he enters. He sees Balon up on the sea stone chair, a, quote, a chair, quote, carved in the shape of a great kraken from an immense block of oily black stone. I think it's our first mention of oily black stone in Song of Ice and Fire. Theon thinks about how legend had it that the ancient Ironborn found the chair on the shores of Old Wick. Then Theon notices that Balon is flanked by Victarion and Aeron, but it was Asha who had the seat of honor at Balon's right hand. You come late, Theon, Lord Balon observed. I ask your pardon. Theon took an empty seat beside Asha, leaning close. Leaning close, he hissed in his ear. Leaning close, he hissed in her ear. You're in my place. She turned to him with innocent eyes. Brother, surely you were mistaken. Your place is at Winterfell. Asha, stop flaying Theon with your words. Okay, maybe flaying is an impolite word to use here. She asks after Theon's former fancy clothes, and Theon notices that Asha is garbed in soft green wool tight to her body. He tries insulting Asha back, asking where all the iron she normally wears is, and Asha says that Theon might end up seeing this, but he'd have to catch her aboard her Black Wind in his slower seepage. Anyways, what you drinking tonight, Theon? Ale? Or maybe some breast milk? Theon flushes and says he's drinking wine. He's been drinking wine for a while. Theon tries eating some stew, but he realizes he's already extremely fucking shithoused. But maybe if he throws up, he can puke on Asha? Question mark. He tries engaging Asha again, asking if Daddy Balon knows that she's married Shipwright. Asha replies that she hasn't married Sigurd. Eskrid was the name of the first ship he built after his mother. Theon angrily retorts that everything Asha said was a lie. But Asha's like, no, not everything was a lie. She likes being on top. Now really fucking pissed, Theon practically stamps his feet like a child, saying that Asha lied about being a woman with a child. Oh, that part was true enough. Asha leapt to her feet. Rolf, here! She shouted down at one of the finger dancers, holding up her hand. He saw her, spun, and suddenly an axe came flying from his hand. The blade gleamed as it tumbled on end over end through the torchlight. Theon had time for a choke gasp before Asha snatched the axe from the air and slammed it down the table, splitting the trencher in two and splattering his mantle with drippings. There's my lord husband. His sister reached down inside her gown and drew a dirk between her breasts. And here's my sweet, suckling babe. Oh, I just love this. This scene is just amazing. Everyone starts roaring with laughter at Theon, and he knows they're all laughing at him. Even Victarion, who, by the way, was not made for dancing, starts to laugh. Balon, too. He smiles, which is odd. Theon attempts to grin back like he's in on the joke, but he's not. Everyone knows the truth, too. Asha removes the dagger and tells Theon to heed her counsel about choosing a good crew. Theon needs to know his crew, much like if Theon had bothered to learn one goddamn thing about Sigurd, he wouldn't have been fooled by Asha. 10 years wolf, and you land here and think to prince about the islands, but you know nothing and no one. Why should men fight and die for you? Well, I am their lawful prince, Theon said stiffly. By the laws of Greenlands, you might be, but we make our own laws here. Or have you forgotten? Theon scowls and begins fuming about how he came back to the Iron Islands only to face mockery, and this really wasn't how he remembered things. Or, well, maybe it was that kind of the way that was. Theon had been really young when he left and hadn't known the full truth. I'm sure Theon's going to figure things out soon enough, though. But then Balon rises from the sea stone chair and states that it's well past time to get to the war shit. He has a plan, okay, to announce. Theon jumps up to please his dad, but Asha makes fun of him for rushing off. When Theon's like, but Dad said, Asha says that she's not going to rush about, but if Theon wants to go sprinting after his dad and uncles, it'd be an easy task, given how Aaron is drunk on seawater and Victarion is, and I love this, so I'm quoting it, a quote, gray great bullock so dim he'll probably get lost. So Theon sits his ass back down, saying he's not going to run after any man. No man, but every woman, Asha says. It was not me who grabbed your cock. Well, I don't have one, remember, Asha said. Or, excuse me one time. I don't have one, remember? You grabbed every bit of me quick enough. Theon could feel the flush creeping up his cheeks. I'm a man with a man's hungers. What sort of unnatural creature are you? Only a shy maid. Asha's hand darted out under the table to give his cock a squeeze. Theon nearly jumped from his chair. What? Don't want me to steer you into port, brother? Marriage is not for you, Theon decided. When I rule, I believe I will pack you off to the Silent Sisters. Theon jumps to his feet and runs after Balon. No, it's definitely not because he wants to avoid getting verbally incinerated again by Asha. No way. Not that man. Man. Theon is a big, strong man. He just really needs to go see what Balon is planning. Theon stumbles out to the rope bridge at the sea tower and is able to unsteadily make it across the bridge, gripping the ropes tightly, pretending like a little fucking child that it's Asha's neck he's grabbing. He finds Balon under all those lovely sealskin robes in the tower. When Balon sees his, quote, son, he immediately announces his plan. Theon has a few suggestions, but good Dad Balon tells him when he wants Theon's opinion, he'll give it to the boy. Anyways, when the drums and stonehouses arrive at Pike, they're all going to sail. Not Balon, of course, everyone else. Theon will have the, quote, honor of drawing first blood by taking 8 longships and raiding the stony shore. If all goes well, Theon will draw the Northern Lords out of their castles, and Theon will have the helpful advisors of Nuncle Aaron and Dagger Cleftjaw with him. Damper intones about the drowned god, but Theon fumes. Felt as if he had been slapped. He was being sent to do reaver's work, burning fishermen out of their hovels and raping their ugly daughters, and yet it seems Lord Balon did not trust him sufficiently to even do that much. Bad enough to have to suffer the Damper's scowls and chidings. With Dagger Cleftjaw along as well, his command would be purely nominal. But then Balon turns to Asha, my daughter. God, it's just gonna burn. Ouch. She's going to take 30 longships and raid at Sea Dragon Point. She'll land north of Deepwood Mott and take the castle. Asha likes this idea and says that she's always wanted a castle. Theon, still fuming, knows Deepwood Mott and thinks he should have been granted Deepwood. But before Theon can stew some more, Balon then turns to Victarion, dumbest Dunk Greyjoy, and orders him to sail up the Salt Spear and Fever River. Nice little reference there. Victarion will land outside of Deepwood Mott and take the castle, cutting Robb Stark and his ability to come back north. And the Lannisters will cut him off to the south. He'll be trapped. Evil laugh apart by the Greyjoys. It's a shitty plan. It's just so fucking shitty. Theon could not keep silent. A bold plan, father, but the lords in their castles. Lord Balon wrote him over. The lords are gone south with the pup. Those who remain behind are the Cravens, old men, and green boys. They will yield and fall. One by one, Winterfell may defy us a year. But what of it? The rest shall be ours, forest and field and hall. And we shall make the folk our thralls and salt wives. Okay, buddy. I'm just like, okay, this is just a shitty fucking plan. Not sure about the strategy. We'll talk about this soon. Oh, my God. The Ironborn, the Greyjoys. Damp hair intones piously about the drowned god, spreading his dominion through the lands. Everyone, even a reluctant Theon, does their "what is dead may never die" chant to each other, and the grand master strategy of history's greatest motherfucking dumbass comes to a close. Wait, what, dumbass? How can I say it's just an evil thing, Jeff? Because I can, and I'm right. Theon emerges outside the sea towers, the rain falls, and the wind blows. He tries crossing the rope bridge, but a gust of wind makes him stumble to his knees. Asha helped him rise. You can't hold your wine either, brother. Theon leaned on her shoulder and let her guide him across the rain-slick boards. I liked you better when you were Eskrid, he told her accusingly. She laughed. That's fair. I liked you better when you were 9. And that is Clash of Kings Theon 2. The Let's Laugh at Theon for the entirety of this chapter of A Song of Ice and Fire. I love it. It's great. It's hilarious. The Greyjoys are all fucking idiots. It's amazing. What did you think of this chapter, dude?
This is one of those chapters that makes me want to get like a mind wipe so I could read it again for the first time. Theon 2 is a perfect slice of comedy, a steadily building joke that Theon realizes far too late is on him. This time through, I thought of the whole chapter from Asha's perspective, and it got even funnier. She must have heard about his arrival while on Harlaw, visiting their mother. Presumably, she thought Theon might pose a threat to her hard-won status as Balon's heir. She had to feel him out, see what she was up against with this new rival. And then, like 30 seconds into the conversation, she clearly thought to herself, oh, okay, he's a complete tool. There's no threat here whatsoever. Time to have some fun. And so she does, and so do we.
Exactly. And for me, and my opening thoughts about this is that before there was the British and its far superior American version of The Office, before Curb Your Enthusiasm, before Veep, before, quote, cringe comedy was a term in common usage, there was George R.R. Martin and the cringe comedy of A Clash of Kings Theon 2. It's one of my favorite aspects of doing this on a reread. You talked about how it would be nice having in mind what can be able to read this chapter again, but I find there's a lot of enjoyment too in knowing the reveal is coming towards the end of this chapter. And you know, one of my favorite aspects too of doing this reread podcast is that by knowing the reveal of Eskrid / Asha ahead of time, we can really get to enjoy how badly Theon is fucking himself up. But speaking a little bit more about cringe comedy, it has immense value in setting a target on the back of transgressive behavior through the most subversive of means, mockery. I mean, we laugh at Michael Scott's behavior because of how wrong it is. And we laugh at Theon because all this arrogance, this sense of entitlement, those things that we just, you know, we should be honest about it, those kind of rapey vibes he puts out, they and Theon all get comeuppance through Asha's reveal at the end of this chapter and the mass mockery that gets leveled on Theon at the end, at chapter's end. Man, that feast scene, I mean, it's so amazing at one point that you kind of go like a full 360 and you almost feel bad for Theon at the end of the chapter. Everyone's laughing. I mean, not a whole lot, but I mean, just a little bit, just a teeny tiny little bit when everyone's laughing at him.
So I was comparing this chapter as I read it to another chapter largely devoted to the introduction of a single character, and that's A Storm of Swords Tyrion 5 with Oberyn Martell. That chapter takes its time building up to the introduction of Oberyn, putting him in context with the Dornish heraldry that we're going to talk about in our heraldry episode, and Tyrion's increasingly nervous thoughts about the person he's going to have to deal with. But in this chapter, Asha's introduction happens immediately, like in the second line, with zero context, and the chapter hurtles forward from there, because the author is hiding her true identity and so benefits from keeping the audience a step behind. It's a noticeable stylistic break, especially on reread when you know why. Theon 2 sets its tone immediately by opening with a sex joke, equating women with a boat. Theon talks about how your first one is always beautiful, clearly talking about sex when he's, on the surface talking about a boat. And storytellers have always drawn links between our sexual desires and the vessels we construct around us, especially those meant for war. For Theon, though, his new boat represents both his dick and the women he wants to stick it in. Like, we see the former association throughout the chapter when they're talking to a guy on the street. Fat with child and talking of twins. So soon. Eskrid smiled that wicked smile. You got your oar in the water quickly? Aye, and stroked and stroked and stroked, roared the man. Or just between the two of them, would you make me your captain for the night, my lord prince? I might, if I knew you'd steer me safe into port. Well, I know which end of the oar goes in the sea, and there's no one better with ropes and knots. And then at the dinner scene, Asha's hand darted out under the table to give his cock a squeeze. Theon nearly jumped from his chair. What? Don't you want me to steer you into port, brother? So you see this easy metaphor being set up. And you can also see it in Theon's comments about how his boat isn't as big as his dad's or his uncle's. But, it still looks sweet and has a nice ram. The same dynamic is at work with his horse, Smiler. Theon describes him as not as big as most knights' horses, which is fine because Theon isn't quite as big as a knight. But hey, ladies, Smiler's still aggressive and fiery and too much for some. And this is all the funnier on reread when you know that that Theon is like subtle compared to his uncle Aeron, because Aeron named his boat the Golden Storm and wanted to shape its ram like a dick. So there's a clear boat-penis association here, befitting the violent masculine ideal of the old way Ironborn. We sail out from here to fuck Westeros bloody. On the other hand, Theon starts the chapter by comparing his first boat to his first sexual partner, a woman, and then compares it to Asha, and then names it Sea Bitch. We call boats she, after all, so which is it? Are they the screw or the screwed in Theon's mindset? It's confused, and I think what this confusion is getting at is the sexual dynamic between Theon and Asha, in which he thinks he's the screw, but he's actually getting screwed. He thinks he's on top, but as she says, she likes to be on top. She's actually in charge, and he just doesn't know it. This goes hand in hand with Theon describing Asha as potentially having a man's appetites and Balon referring to both of them as my sons. It's not that Asha actually identifies as a man or has penis envy. It's that she performs Ironborn masculinity better than Theon despite being a woman. And all of this, of course, perfectly sets up Ramsay castrating Theon, taking his power and identity away completely, where Asha challenges them for fun. Do you think it's fair to say that both Ramsay and Asha are kind of putting Theon through the same ringer and taking advantage of the same weaknesses, even though, of course, their end games are totally different?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Theon is basically his weakness is everything, but especially it's his sexual proclivities. He's got a lot of weaknesses, yeah, but his sexual proclivities, and Asha immediately zeroes in on that. And you have to, I would have to imagine that Asha probably had a little bit of intelligence of knowing who Theon was and how he kind of rolled into Lordsport and was with the type of company that he was aware of. Like there's that reference later on in this chapter to the merchant's daughter, to the daughter of, and how Asha's making these observations. Theon's like, she's so spot on, she's amazing. So to me, it feels like Asha had done a little bit of intelligence preparation of the battlefield before actually encountering Theon Greyjoy. So she hones in on his weakness, and she hones on it very, very well.
Yes, indeed. So to drill down to specifics, Theon immediately sees that Asha belongs here. She's Ironborn at a glance, he can tell, moving like she's used to a deck beneath her feet. And what he doesn't yet realize is that he looks like the opposite to her and everyone else. He looks like a mainland fop who doesn't know the first thing about a sailor's life. What he uses to compensate for that, as in Theon 1, is sex, because sex is the one domain in which he feels confident and in which he can be in charge. He immediately starts hitting on her with what we could consider the signature Theon mixture of predatory aggression and semi-ironic sweetness. Just like Dantos and the gods would in Sansa 2, Theon knows the script of chivalry. He knows what he's supposed to say. But also like Dantos, Theon keeps giving away that this is a performance, that it's all just a shadow on a wall. So on the one hand, he'll pontificate about how he longs for her and how he'll die distraught in battle if she doesn't fuck him. But on the other hand, he very sarcastically mocks the princess in a tower trope when he's talking about her. So George is showing us how the shining knight from the songs isn't actually the stable foundation of society you can rely on. It's just an image which can be easily manipulated by people uninterested in living up to chivalric values. They're just wearing them like a mask. Maybe the most telling example of that in this scene is how Theon frames sex with him as an event worthy of story and song, something to tell your grandkids about. And that's in response to Asha saying that she's had princes and they're made the same as other men. So by then lurching into story and song, Theon is basically admitting that, yeah, she's right. His cock is not magical. It's not special in itself. It's only special because he's Prince Theon of House Greyjoy. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that doesn't really impress anybody. Theon, like so many characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, is caught between the ideal and the reality, and so winds up the worst of both worlds. We'll see this again later in the book at Winterfell, where he doesn't even have the, honesty to act as a conqueror. He actually expects the people to love him like they did Ned Stark.
You want to go? Oh, sorry.
This is your line.
Yeah, sorry about that. Moreover, George has Prince Theon getting turned on by the sight of sexing Ysgridd because she's bound in marriage to Sigrun. It'd be easy for the scenes, I think, simply to be Theon being a romantic, predatorial dumbass, but Theon's refrain of trying to get Ysgridd to break her marriage vows works in service to Theon's turn cloaking in the Stark storyline. Of course, we've already seen Theon remembering how he and Patrick Malister went and visited a, quote, amorous miller's wife before he departed Seaguard, and we'll see a much more brutal version of this aspect of Theon's personality with regard to another miller's wife outside of Winterfell and the mercy that she asked for before Theon's men kill her. But the symbolism of Theon's transgressive sexuality works as subtle story building of Theon's turncloak transgression. You, I mean, you'd imagine Theon thinking this. You, a married woman, slept with me, and I, a man who, I guess I sort of kind of pledged my sword to Robb Stark at River Run, betrayed my oath, maybe possibly betrayed my oath. We're not so much different, you and I, right? I mean, that's basically the mentality that Theon is bringing into this conversation with Sigrun and the cuckolding that he's hoping to bring to this master, to his father's master of ships.
And Theon wants to skip over this border, this division, because it reflects how Theon has a foot in both worlds with no clear home or identity in either one. You know, Asha keeps talking in this chapter about outsiders like Euron and the captain's daughter, and Theon only gradually realizes she's actually talking about him. As he says, 10 years at Winterfell left him far more comfortable going to war with a horse between his legs than a ship beneath him. He admits it only in the privacy of his thoughts in this first conversation. He's never actually captained a ship before, making him a virgin, you could say. And he banishes these thoughts by focusing all his energies on prying open Asha's legs. But in the process, he misses all the signs that she's not what she appears. And that proves her point. That proves those negative thoughts he's having about himself are right. This isn't just Asha dismantling a rival. This is her arranging a case study to demonstrate why he shouldn't be in charge. He fails the test. This is how he approaches situations, and it's really bad. Theon's trying so hard in this chapter to regain the swaggering equilibrium his father and uncle tore to shreds in Theon 1, but by the end, he's only fallen farther.
Absolutely. He's basically embodying the soft elements that the Ironborn have rejected and that his father specifically rejected in his first chapter. He's basically failed yet another test, right? The first test he failed was coming into Lordsport itself, and with Aaron Damphair. Second failed test was with his father, Balon Greyjoy. Third failed test is here with Asha. He's demonstrating that he's not cut out to be heir to the Iron Islands. Like you were saying at the beginning of this episode about how you could imagine this from Asha's point of view and how she maybe saw Theon as a potential threat to her role as the heir. But by this point in the conversation, he's just a doofus. He's a fucking moron, and he's not really he doesn't pose any threat whatsoever to Asha Greyjoy. So she decides to have a little fun with him in terms of their ride that they're going to make all the way up to Pike and their walk down to Lordsport before all that.
Yes, so this opening conversation is self-consciously circular. It's like a lot of great comedy scenes that call attention to how little has been communicated or accomplished in the scene. It ends, the lordling has a honeyed tongue. Isn't that where we began? She threw up her hands. And where we end. So from there, they set out into Lordsport. The camera widens to take in more than just the two of them, and we see in detail how Asha is at home and Theon isn't. He hilariously thinks that everyone is getting silent and bending their heads respectfully to him, when of course it's for Asha, the true heir and widely beloved. There's the beautiful irony of Theon saying, they have finally learned who I am, when he hasn't learned who his companion really is. But it's also just so telling that Theon would just blindly believe that everyone would eventually just accept him as their superior, with no work on his part required. This is all he was waiting to happen. He was never planning on earning his place through sweat equity. We'll see that again when he talks with Dagmar in Theon 3. Again, it's the worst of both worlds. Theon is an ambitious slacker, and so he can cause so much more damage than a properly lazy slacker ever could. Like if he was content to be the Daron, the drunken dreamer of House Greyjoy, and just sit in Lordsport getting drunk every day, you know, that's not exactly the most dignified of lives, but it's a life, and it's more than he ends up getting at Ramsay's hands. He wants to be on top, and he knows he needs men loyal to him rather than to the rest of his family, as he thinks to himself in this chapter. But he just has no idea how to make that happen. Asha, by contrast, she knows everyone's name, everyone's profession, everyone's family history. She knows exactly how to talk to each one in turn. She knows when to say what is dead may never die, and Theon can only catch up to mumble it.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, Asha is greeting everyone and knowing the small matters of their personal lives. Is that like the best Greyjoy equivalent to Ned Stark's line from Arya's Game of Thrones chapter? I think it's Arya 3. Know the men who follow you, she heard Ned tell Robb once. And let them know you. Don't ask your men to die for a stranger. Question mark. I mean, is that basically Asha Greyjoy basically embodying the Stark words? I mean, there's a Stark-like quality to Asha, and I wonder whether that's the literary term that George utilized to make her the most sympathetic Greyjoy in the story. And I'm really kind of curious how Asha was able to attain this leadership trait, given that Balon, Victarion, and Aaron, they don't exemplify this whatsoever in any of her interactions with them. Theon, though, was raised by Ned Stark, but because Theon knew that he was a hostage to Balon's good behavior, he has some thoughts about this. Recall Theon's memories from his first chapter about Eddard Stark. Lord Eddard raised him among his own children, but Theon had never been one of them. Lord Eddard had tried to play the father from time to time, but Theon, he had always remained the man who'd brought blood and fire to Pike and taken him from his home. As a boy, Theon had lived in fear of Stark's stern face and great dark sword. And this kind of brought me back to the second chapter in All the Song of Ice and Fire, Bran's first chapter in A Game of Thrones. Remember Theon kicking Garrett's head after Ned beheaded the man? Remember Jon calling him an ass for that? Looking back at the event with these first two Theon chapters in mind, it reads like Theon's doing everything within his limited power to reject that Stark solemnity regarding execution. You must look in a man's eyes and hear the last words, and the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. And I think this small example, it could be a microcosm of Theon's relationship with his ideology of his former Stark captors or foster family, both. My sense is that Theon's resentment and fear of Ned Stark led him to reject the principles of his, quote, foster father, perhaps tossing aside the know your men mantra in favor of an arrogant, dismissive attitude towards the work. That's going to change, though, come a Dance with Dragons, because Theon will be course-corrected by Ramsay and come to know the names of all the people around him, all the while remembering his own name as Reek, before reclaiming it as Theon in that triumphant moment at the end of A Dance with Dragons.
That's a great point. That's a terrific inversion. And yeah, Theon, even as he dismisses Ned Stark, you see him in desperate moments in this book. Ned is really the only model he can fall back on. It's the only kind of way to be a man he really knows intimately, because as much as he's trying to live up to the Ironborn image, he doesn't know it that well because he hasn't been here since he was a kid. Theon can't do any of this right, and no one's even bothering to talk to him. And the emotional core of these developments, what makes you relate to Theon despite him being such a tremendous prick, is moments like this. I've been away too long to know one man from another, Theon admitted. He had looked for a few of the friends he'd played with as a boy, but they were gone, dead, or grown into strangers. So even if Theon was more humble and hardworking, he'd still be completely alone in what's supposed to be his home. Still, it's hard to feel too sorry for him when he's manhandling Wex and dismissing the captain's daughter and copping a feel of his riding companion at every turn. As I said in Theon 1, I feel sympathy for Theon regarding what people with power over him do to him, but none at all for how he uses his power over other people. His fragile identity, his overcompensating sexuality, his pathetic stabs at authoritarianism mixed with songs and stories naivete, all of this is played for laughs here, but it will get significantly darker when Theon returns to the north. So Asha continues her interrogation of Theon's political and cultural isolation when the conversation turns from ships and their crews to House Greyjoy specifically. Theon asserts that he is the heir, in the same breath that he acknowledges that his father doesn't treat him that way. Little does he know that he is fondling the major reason why Balon doesn't treat him like the heir, because he is another option he has come to much prefer. Asha mildly pushes back on Theon's status as the heir, pointing out that, hey, your uncles might want a piece of the pie. Once more, Theon doesn't really have a plan other than hoping for the best. Like, yes, as he says, Aeron and Victarion are born cronies, but they knuckle under to Balon, specifically, because he led the ideal masculine old way life. And Theon, as we see throughout this chapter, very much has not. I mean, Theon has already seen that Aeron has no respect for him, so this is a delusional plan. Same goes for when Asha brings up Euron, like, hey, what about that other uncle? The one that, every living thing on Earth is afraid of. What about him? Theon's plan amounts to, I hope that he's dead? But that's not a plan. And then Asha, very subtly, brings up herself. And all Theon can do is envision her as the child she was. And this exposes the alienation at the heart of Theon's power fantasy in this chapter. His impression of the Iron Islands is permanently stuck in childhood. The islands and his family have moved on, while he has been unable to do so in Winterfell. He's not only a stranger here, he's so estranged that he doesn't even know it, the same way a fish doesn't notice water. All he has to offer is his cock and his image, the person he wants to be from the stories and songs, and that image is precisely how Asha unlocks him. It's a cruel lordling who seized me. If I promise you that one day you may watch my babe get sucked, will you tell me more of your war, Theon of House Greyjoy? There are miles and mountains still ahead of us, and I would hear of this wolf king you served, and the golden lions he fights. Ever anxious to please her, Theon obliged. The rest of the long ride passed swiftly as he filled her pretty head with tales of Winterfell and war. Some of the things he said astonished him. Like, this is Theon's one asset, the knowledge that he has of Winterfell in the north that no one else on the Iron Islands has, and he's just giving it all away for free. Even Theon is astonished at himself, but what he doesn't seem to understand is that war stories about him fighting alongside Ned Stark's son don't make him impressive in Ironborn eyes. They make him an outsider. That's the Ned Stark who helped break Pike, They're not going to feel closer to him because Theon is telling these stories.
Right. He's also the Ned Stark who, as Balon is said in his first chapter, that killed Balon's other sons, which of course is not actually what happened. It wasn't Ned Stark who killed Meryn and killed the other one whose name I forget off the top of my head. But in actuality, if it had come to sources, Theon thinks in that first chapter, Ned Stark would have killed both of them. And it's kind of like I was trying to like just wrap my mind around like what would be like a modern parallel. I mean, I was thinking like it would be like I don't even know, like a member of the Nazi war machine coming back to the American army, joining the American army, being like, yes, remember all that time I killed all those American GIs back in the day? Remember when I served with the Nazis? Like, yeah, that's not really going to win you a lot of favors and a lot of appreciation in the eyes of the Ironborn. And that all is though building into that great and amazing reveal of Ysgrid, who doesn't turn out to actually be Ysgrid, wife of Sigurd.
At this point, as a first-time reader, as they're riding up to Pike, you may be wondering if this is really all this chapter is going to be. Like Theon Greyjoy gradually gets laid the chapter. But Theon's clueless arrogance dominated Theon 1 as well, of course, but we had a clear sense of direction from the start. That paper is good as a crown, or is it? In this chapter, we get a sudden twist that completely changes our understanding of what the whole thing has been about, and the humor takes on a whole new dimension. This isn't just some random woman Theon's been inflicting his insecurities on. He's been giving himself away to his major rival for power, and also feeling up his sister in the process. And the moment of the reveal is designed to make perfectly clear that she has won this power struggle before it even really began. The dogs love her. Whereas Theon, who will be so at home with Ramsay's dogs, only kicks and snarls at them. The stableman ignores him completely to welcome Asha home with a smile. And in this moment, the full weight of time and distance crashes in on Theon. He realized suddenly that there were two Ashas in his head. One was the little girl he had known. The other, more vaguely imagined, looked something like her mother. Neither looked a bit like this. He was not prepared to come home at any level. Not politically, not culturally, and not personally. He was getting hard on his own macho identity, and now he's left with blue balls and the realization that he has no idea who he or anyone else is. Asha appropriately at this moment turns it all back on the body, mocking what he said about her earlier. The pimples went when the breasts came, she explained while she tussled with the dog, but I kept the vulture's beak. But then she quickly gets to the core of things. When Theon asks, why didn't you tell me? Asha let go of the hound and straightened. I wanted to see who you were first. And I did. She handled her arrival on Pike so much better than he did, getting information without giving any, using all of her strengths, turning weaknesses into strengths. It's such a ferociously intelligent act, coupled with utter fearlessness and a lack of concern with taboo. It's such an intense performance that even Theon, the eternal peacock, is just left gaping. He can only relieve the shame of it later as his erection wilts along with his remaining self-confidence. And just for a moment after this display, Theon achieves clarity, seeing himself as he truly is. Thinking to himself, he could not possibly have made a more appalling fool of himself. And then immediately he shuts it down. No, he thought then. She was the one who made me a fool. The evil bitch must have enjoyed every moment of it. And then later, I have no place here, he thought, and Asha is the reason. May the others take her. And here we learn all we need to know, really, about how the rest of Theon's arc in this book is going to go. The setting and stakes will change, but this drive does not. Asha thoroughly disarmed him, robbing him not only of his presumed place in Ironborn hierarchy and in House Greyjoy, but the sexual confidence that is at the core of the identity he came up with during his formative years on the mainland. Theon is terrified of starting his identity over from scratch, again, especially in what was supposed to be the cradle of his restoration and self-actualization. So he externalizes all of the blame, his insecurity manifesting as resentment, and he latches onto Asha not only because she personally humiliated him, not only because she's taken his place as heir, but because she rendered him completely undignified at the core of his self-image. She will never be impressed by him, and Theon really needs people to be impressed by him. He will murder children to avoid being laughed at. Asha is a laughing storm, his worst possible nightmare.
And it all could have been avoided if Theon had just asked a question or two or attempted to inquire about what was going on in the Iron Islands, learning more about what Asha's place was in the Greyjoy court, learning about what she'd been up to and what she was all about. And, you know, learning as well about the different people that are serving his father, Lord Balon, Sigurd, his master of ships, the person, his shipwright rather, who has made the ships for him. He should know this guy because as Theon well knows at this point in A Clash of Kings, the Ironborn are about to go to war, and it's probably a pretty smart idea to get to know the guy who's going to build the ships that are going to carry you and your men into battle. Maybe, possibly. No. He's just a peasant. I don't have to get to know the work. Theon is, at this point, it's hilarious, and it's also like the lines you were citing. They do lend a smidge of sympathy and almost pity for Theon. It's something that's going to manifest itself into a lot of sympathy and pity come in A Dance of Dragons, especially when we reconnect with Theon Greyjoy. But here we're starting to get not just the inklings of how Theon's arc in A Clash of Kings are going to go, but that reader's sympathy is being slowly built. It's that slow burn storytelling that George loves to integrate. So that come A Dance of Dragons is going to be full blown, and we're not going to necessarily forgive Theon for all the horrible shit he's going to do in A Clash of Kings, but we are going to feel immense pity for him and want him to get the fuck out of Winterfell.
You sympathize for Theon in this book like you do with like a panicked rat in a cage, in that you don't want him to be there, but you also don't want to put your hand near him. Mm-hmm. And like in Dance, like, you know, that rat has been through so many lab experiments that it's barely getting by, and you just feel the intense weight of the sympathy for him. So I didn't notice until this reread how we get several chapters in a row clustered around the dinner table, each from a different perspective. We've been the host with Bran 3 in Winterfell, a welcome guest with Catelyn down in the Reach in Renly's camp, a not so welcome guest with Jon at Craster's Keep, and now we are Theon, a guest who wants to be the host but is being rejected. I love that they're playing the finger game as he comes in, just to emphasize it. Just another Ironborn tradition that leaves him on the outside, a game he does not know how to play. As in Lordsport, as in the approach to the castle, no one pays him the slightest attention when he walks in. As he approaches the Seastone chair, font of Ironborn identity from which all Greyjoy authority flows, Theon sees Asha next in line for it. Theon took the empty seat beside Asha. Leaning close, he hissed in her ear, "You're in my place." She turned to him with innocent eyes. "Brother, surely you are mistaken. Your place is at Winterfell." Her smile cut. And yeah, this knife cuts even deeper than the previous ones, because Asha is getting at the same roadblock that Uncle Aeron did in Theon 1, which is that everyone sees him as a Stark. His place, as far as they're concerned, is at Winterfell, where his presence won't bring shame on everyone, where he won't remind these fools drunk on their own image that the last time they tried this, they got their asses kicked by the supposedly inferior mainlanders. And again, even if he wasn't the most useless entitled gasbag in Westeros, Theon would never have been able to get around this image as an outsider. And something I really like about Asha's character is that she understands that deep down and sympathizes. And for all her mockery, her intentions towards Theon aren't actually malign. As she points out in this dinner scene, she did give him genuinely good advice, and she tries to make him understand that his attitude is the problem. This is Asha's version of tough love, humiliating Theon in the hopes of building him back up into a better man, someone she can work with. But what she doesn't yet understand is that Theon's identity is so fragile that he'll just bolt like a panicked deer in the direction of performative bloodshed rather than follow her lead and build it slowly. Asha, on the other hand, is fully invested in her performance, hence that husband and suckling babe routine, which gets everyone in the room on her side. Asha is just a force of pure charisma, like Robert in his prime. Balon is smiling, Victarion greets her fondly in A Feast for Crows, and Aeron admits in the privacy of his thoughts in The Forsaken that she was his favorite of Balon's children. Even Euron laughs when Asha mocks Eric Ironmaker at the Kingsmoot. But this is not because Asha was just born this way. She has had to cultivate this persona in order to be accepted as Balon's heir, hence her mockery of Theon's clothes. She's trying to set herself apart. The husband and suckling babe routine isn't just a fun way of taking little bro down a peg. It's a way of answering the inevitable question about why she's in charge instead of taking care of a husband and a suckling babe. It grounds the gender transition from Balon to Asha in the imagery of reaving, of old way violence. This comforts people. There is some continuity between old and new. Again, Asha just performs this role so much better than Theon, and he will commit atrocities that make even her flinch in order to outdo her.
Right. You have that line from Theon's fourth chapter in A Clash, or fifth chapter in A Clash of Kings, where Asha is sitting on, of course, she's sitting in Ned Stark's seat, was when she comes into Winterfell, and she asks Theon, "Which one gave you more trouble, the cripple or the baby?" Like it's very much like that Asha is like cutting into this, and she's utilizing humor in order to look at this horrible situation that Theon has done, this horrible act that Theon has done. Something else that really struck me about this dinner scene is a little bit of a comparison, a little bit almost to the Red Wedding. If you remember from the Red Wedding, the food is shitty and horrible in the Red Wedding because Walder Frey is not going to serve, as you've said in the past, Walder Frey is not going to serve the best food to men who are just about to die. In this feast scene here, we get the same sort of vantage point of bad food being served. You almost get the sense that Balon Greyjoy is not going to waste good food on men he's about to send out to die for him. And this kind of gets at the heart of Balon Greyjoy as a character. And we are going to talk extensively about him in a moment here, about his battle plan and how callous he is, not just in giving his men the final meal before they set off to war, but also of giving them the shit food. He's not going to spend food on money. He's not going to spend money on good food for men who are just about to die. Come on, come on. We're the Greyjoys, and we hard as iron and stuff like that.
That's true. I mean, they also just don't have nicer food there. I think though on the Iron Islands, like this, that's kind of the atmosphere you get. And Balon has been feasting them every night. Theon said, so I don't get the sense he's necessarily close-handed with them. I just think like this is good fare for the Ironborn. Theon is just used to much nicer food at Winterfell, where they take this sort of thing seriously.
That's true. That could be true enough. So now speaking of Balon Greyjoy, now we finally get to the seminal event of this chapter, which is Balon's master plan, so to speak. It's only fitting that this chapter closes with the comedy bit of Theon stumbling into Balon's chambers after almost falling off of the rope bridge, and everyone stopping the pleasantries to get on with the plan to spend the least amount of time around Theon as possible. Really, that pity starts to ramp up at the end of this chapter. But now that everyone's assembled, it's time for Balon Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, to bring his strategic vision for how the Ironborn will defeat the North. All right, so let's break it down very, very quickly. Theon's role is a shaping operation, so he's going to harass the Stony Shore, bringing the lords and garrisons out of their castles. Asha also has a shaping role. She's going to take Deepwood Mott. Victarion is going to be the decisive operation. He's going to seize and hold Moat Cailin. And Balon rationalizes that if they can seal Robb Stark from re-entering the North, they will have the war as good as won. I don't know about that. The Lannisters will then push up from the south as the hammer. Victarion will be the anvil. But what about the men the North has left behind? Well, they're just cravens and boys, green boys, nothing to worry about, so says Balon. And then Winterfell will very definitely surrender within the year, and they all get to make everyone thralls and salt wives. Lovely. Guys, holy shit, but this is extremely dumb even by Balon Greyjoy standards. First, let's break it down this way. We'll talk about the strategy, then we'll talk about the tactics, and then I'll talk about the ethics of it all. So first, the geopolitical strategy. Like we've talked about with Tyrion and with Renly, they only imagine scenarios where everything goes exactly as they planned. Balon follows suit, but he compounds his arrogance by not asking first when he could have for help. At least Renly was smart enough to grab up a benefactor in the Tyrells and the Reach before striking off. Tyrion, too, is working to bring Dorne into the orbit of the Iron Throne. But Balon refuses to ask anyone for help, even when their interests coincide. Now, later on, Balon is going to do a bit of post-facto asking, but Tywin is going to see right through this in a storm of swords. King Balon's longships are occupied for the nonce, Lord Tywin said politely. As are we. Greyjoy demands half the kingdom as the price of alliance. But what will he do to earn it? Fight the Starks? He is doing that already. Why should we pay for what he has given us for free? So like we talked about back in Catelyn's first chapter and Theon's first chapter, Balon Greyjoy is forsaking any useful allies when there are allies available until he decides I really should kind of get those guys on my side. But then what's Balon's imagined end state and the end of his glorious invasion? The rest shall be ours, forest and field and hall, and we shall make the folk our thralls and salt wives. This is this pure Conan the Barbarian, crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women barbarism. But this end, I think when we got to kind of dig down a little bit deeper into this. This end ensures that the entire North is going to fight to the death rather than surrender. The Ironborn offer nothing besides chains, rape, and if you somehow evade both of these fates, they'll make sure you face certain death when their livestock and cattle are stolen. So it's going to be a fight to the death. So it's going to be a fight to the death sort of deal across tens of thousands of square miles of unfamiliar territory. So that's why the geopolitical strategy is fucking shit. On to the tactics. Bad tactics. AKA Balon forgets that White Harbor exists and that Moat Cailin also faces to the north. Like, this guy's such a fucking idiot, guys. Yeah, I just can't even begin. So Balon compounds his idiotic geopolitical strategy by choosing an invasion of the north, which targets only one half of the region. Guess what location is ever mentioned in this grand strategy? Okay, it's probably better if we talk about the locations Balon specifically mentions. The Stony Shore, Deepwood Mott, Moat Cailin, and Winterfell. No mention of, I don't know, say Bear Island, the Last Hearth, Torn Square, Barrowton, the Dreadfort, Carhold, and especially White Harbor. Balon sort of rolls all these locations up in terms of their military power as cravens, old men, and green boys. But we as readers know that's not the case. There's a significant military force remaining in the north, concentrated especially around White Harbor. In A Game of Thrones, we learned that Robb has ordered most of the Manderleys and their vassal hosts to remain in the north, but it's not just the reader who knows this information. Theon knows it too. He sat in war councils with Robb Stark. He's even present when Catelyn arrives with Willis and Wendell Manderley at Moat Cailin back in A Game of Thrones Catelyn 8. And speaking of Moat Cailin, hey, Balon, I know you're all about, quote, sealing off the south causeway to the Moat Cailin. Are you aware that there's another causeway from the north? Just wondering. Robb Stark is going to make this point explicitly come a storm of swords, planning to utilize the northern causeway into Moat Cailin in order to kick Victarion out of the north. And that leads me to my third point about how this is a colossal tactical blunder on Balon Greyjoy's part. Balon fails to utilize the one person in his war council who is familiar with the north, Theon. Because of Balon Greyjoy's wounded pride and rejection of his son, he refused to even consider Theon's ideas about how the northern invasion should go. Theon says, I have some suggestions. And Balon replies, when I require your counsel, I shall ask for it. And at one level, the reader's primed to laugh at Theon again for getting sucker punched. And yeah, you can imagine Balon rolling his eyes at this, quote, kid trying to play general in the war. But on another level, this is fucking bonkers. I mean, yeah, Theon's a braggart, but he's not lying about being part of Brynden Tully's picked scouts and participating in both the Battle of the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps. So the boy's got some military experience under his belt. A bit more recent military experience than Victarion, for instance. And Asha too. But Balon is making a much more colossal error in refusing to even hear Theon out than simply his military experience. Theon didn't just live in the north for 10 years. He visited all of the castles, towns, and cities as Ned Stark's ward. He knows the defenses, personalities, the political divisions that the Greyjoys could exploit. I mean, you could easily imagine a scenario where Balon gets the inside scoop on things like, I don't know, the potential to exploit the Hornwood inheritance crisis, how Lady Dustin holds the Starks in contempt, the simmering tension between the Umbers and the Manderleys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that Balon is missing out by not hearing from Theon. But Balon's not going to hear any of this because, like we were saying in Theon's first chapter, Balon has a sad, and he can't let go of those deep psychological scars left over from his failure of a first rebellion. So then finally, we've talked about the geopolitical strategy. We've talked about the tactics. Let's talk about Balon's immoral, unjust war, or as I'm calling this, why St. Augustine thinks Balon Greyjoy is a fucking moron. You know, to speak a little more seriously for a moment here, 2 years back, the New York Times writer Rukmini Callimachi released her incredible Caliphate podcast, which I really recommend everyone listen to if you have the chance. It details the rise, rule, and fall of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And one of the most heartbreaking episodes of that podcast detailed ISIS's siege and attempted genocide of the Yazidi people on the Sinjar mountain. What I didn't know prior to listening to that episode was that ISIS targeted the Yazidi people because they were polytheists. They were not, quote, people of the book, and they could force the Yazidi women into sexual slavery, kill the men, and enslave the children. You know, coming back to this chapter and getting Balon's perspective on why he wants to invade the north, Balon more than a little resembles that mentality. You recall Balon's expected reward for this invasion. The rest shall be ours, forest and field and hall, and we shall make the folk our thralls and salt wives. So Balon's entire aim is to conquer the north and make the people slaves of the Ironborn, chattel and sex slaves. Remind me again why Balon Greyjoy is never cited as among the biggest monsters in A Song of Ice and Fire again. It's a question in my mind. But hey, we can sound smart about Balon Greyjoy too and bring in our old friend St. Augustine to talk about just war theory and why Balon fails every goddamn ethical principle of war. So Augustine had basically I think it's 5 or 6 principles of warfare: right authority, right intention, reasonable hope, proportionality, and last resort. I don't feel like I have to go into depth on each one why Balon fails this, but he fails every single one of those principles. Right authority, he doesn't have the right to rebel. Right intention, his intention is to enslave people and steal their crops. Reasonable hope, as we talked about, the Greyjoys don't have a reasonable hope of success in taking the north. Proportionality, why is Balon invading and killing all these people because of why again? There's no proportionality here of what's going on. And this is not a defensive war either. This is an offensive war. And finally, as a last resort, Balon Greyjoy doesn't even consider diplomacy at all. War isn't a last resort for him. It is the first resort for him. So Balon Greyjoy, motherfucking dumb. I hate him. He's terrible. And the geopolitical, tactical, and ethical case for the war is just bonkers. Moot, doesn't exist.
Mwah, perfectly said, sir, on every level. It's so clear on reread that Balon is making the same mistakes as Theon, just on a larger scale. Just as Theon strolled into the Iron Islands, assuming everyone would step to and recognize him as the heir, Balon intends on controlling the North through sheer Ubermensch force of will. Both of them come up hard against reality. The old way delusion's effect on strategy mutates "we can win and here's how" into "we will win because God says we're inherently the best." You can see traces of the former in Balon's strategy. Like, he does know they need Moat Cailin to bottle Robb up in the south. He knows they need a base in the interior. He knows it would be good to draw out and scatter some lords if possible. That's what he sends Theon to do. But there's no follow-through, no next step after the initial shock. Balon leaves his soldiers in place for 6 months and then dies when Euron comes home. Theon, for all his follies, knows enough to speak up here and say, hey, Dad, what about everyone who's still, in the North? Robb didn't take everyone. He didn't have time to. As you pointed out, White Harbor alone offers a potent challenge to Ironborn rule, let alone all the other fighting men left in the North. Balon just got lucky that he invaded during the Hornwood Crisis, as you say, of which he appears ignorant, and even luckier that said crisis empowered Ramsay's rise to power. Otherwise, Sir Roderick would have rallied the North in Bran's name at Winterfell, kicked Asha out of Deepwood Mott even quicker than Stannis, and presumably made plans to attack Victarion at Moat Cailin in conjunction with Robb when he returned to the North. Even Asha, the relatively smart one in the room, can only see her own prospects, that she's always wanted a castle and now it's time to take it. It's already a feast for crows. And Theon, meanwhile, as you say, he can't leverage the one useful asset he has, intelligence about the North, and is reduced to being babysat by actual experienced reavers, his uncle Aeron and Dagmar Cleftjaw, who we'll meet in Theon 3. Ultimately, Balon is left with his dick in the wind, just like Theon, who was robbed of dignity one last time at chapter's end, when he can't hold his wine and must lean on Asha. And she does help him. She helps him across the bridge where their father will die, indicating once more that for all Asha's merciless, taboo-breaking power play, she does have Theon's best interest at heart, which you cannot say about their father or their uncles. And George closes out Theon 2 with one more perfect, devastating joke, when Theon says he liked Asha better as Ysgred, and Asha says, well, that's fair. I liked you better when you were 9. Theon is still lost in the projection, the fantasy, the songs and stories his dick loves so much. He's a man-child, and Asha wishes he was just still a literal child. Like, on a personal level, politics aside, that really cuts deeper than anything else she says in the chapter. Asha missed her little brother, the 9-year-old she knew, and he's been replaced by this bumbling narcissist whose brain defers to his dick and who hates her now. Everything that happened to Theon since Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon came to break his childhood, all the experiences that have made him the man who swaggered into POV status at the start of this book, Asha wishes he could just take it all back and be the boy she knew. And by book's end, Theon will too. He'll want to take so much back, but he can't, and neither can she, and neither can Dad. In this chapter, they roll the dice to their doom.
They absolutely do. It's ultimately Theon's story is a story of heartbreak and a song of ice and fire, especially in A Clash of Kings, as the parts of him start to fade away. The sense of nobility, with George has had this saying that every character thinks they're a hero in their own mind, and Theon starts coming that way here. But as he starts to devolve ethically and morally, that hero is replaced by pure villainy and by pure assholishness, by pure murder, as we're going to see in Theon's later chapters. His next chapter, Theon 3, is going to have him talk about how they attacked this village by the stony shore, and they took all the hot women for salt wives, and they raped the ugly ones and killed them afterwards. It's like, God damn! It's
bloody mummer stuff, and it's from the POV of one of the attackers. It's an intense move on George's part.
It really is. It's a courageous move on George's part too, not to flinch away from the horror of that chapter. So I think that happily takes us to our foreshadowing and groundwork portion of this episode. God, Theon's chapters are only going to get worse from here on out, aren't they? Oh my God! Indeed,
and this chapter sets up a lot of that. As with Theon 1, we see George working hard to set up my own favorite child, Euron Crowseye. Here we learn that he has a terrible reputation, both at home and abroad. And George will expand upon this at length in A Feast for Crows, when Euron defies Asha's prediction here and wins the Seastone chair despite being a relative outsider. Or perhaps because he's a relative outsider, because one thing you can see is that Euron handles being an outsider politically so much better than Theon. For Theon, it's his permanent weakness. Euron on A Feast for Crows manages to spin it into a strength.
Right. You can almost imagine a scenario where Theon could do similarly here and leverage some of his experience, not fully, but his experience in the War of the Five Kings in order to be the type of person that could potentially rally the Ironborn to his side, maybe win a little bit of respect from his father. But instead, Theon is a fragile, silly man-child, as you said, really well, and he can't do that. Euron definitely is going to do that. Come a feast for crows. So we also get this reference here in Asha speaking to a man in Lordsport named Carl, which is a pretty common Ironborn name, but maybe this is the one who later became Carl the Maid, Asha's lover. I do think in Theon's 3rd or 4th chapter, I'd have to go back and look now, Carl the Maid is referenced by name, so he was a character that George had at least referenced at one point in A Clash of Kings, and George ends up developing a lot more so that he becomes Asha's lover come A Dance with Dragons. And it's it's probably the best sex scene in A Song of Ice and Fire, that chapter from Asha's perspective, her first A Dance with Dragons chapter. I mean, I think it's pretty awesome.
Well, you just stole my bit of foreshadowing, sir. That was next.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of which, Asha's not kidding when she likes to be on top. We see the proof with Carl at Deepwood Mountain and Dance with Dragons, which, yeah, it's one of George's better sex scenes, though that's not saying much.
Agreed there. Sorry about stealing your thunder. I didn't
No
mean to.
worries.
Apologies. So, as Theon says, if he doesn't like his father's plans or takes his part of him, he's willing to go off script, and he's definitely going to do those in his later chapters, taking Winterfell before sealing his own doom at Ramsay's hand. So he ends up developing this plan specifically to thwart his father and to work and to ensure that he gets the glory that was denied him and given to Asha. So he's going to take the greatest castle in the north, Winterfell. That's going to go really well for him, I think.
Yeah, Theon is, he's just smart enough to know he's setting himself up for trouble, but not smart enough to stop himself. Like, he has another bit of foreshadowing here, is this very revealing aside to himself when he says he doesn't have any gold or jewels, to take off the wildling that he killed in a Game of Thrones. He doesn't have anything he paid the iron price for. He says to himself, that's my cursed luck. I kill the poor. And yeah, he will again. Those poor miller's boys in the north, their bodies used to stand in for the rich Starklings. Theon will kill them not to take the iron price of jewelry or, any kind of money from them. He'll do it to take the iron price of his crown at Winterfell. That's his trade. But yeah, Theon always kills the poor.
Ugh, it's skin crawling for sure. And of course, he does kill those miller's boys at the insistence of his friend and servant Reek. We'll find out more about him come Theon's 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th chapters in A Clash of Kings. So finally, in terms of our foreshadowing groundwork, Theon comments that Smiler, his horse, is a, quote, hell horse and has, quote, fire in his eyes. Oh boy. This seems to me like some horrific foreshadowing of what happens to poor Smiler at the end of A Clash of Kings. Remember those final lines from Theon's chapters in A Clash of Kings before Dance with Dragons? The last thing Theon Greyjoy saw was Smiler kicking free of the burning stables with his mane ablaze, screaming, rearing.
Oh yeah, that's one hell of an image. And I love that, Theon talks about being someone who smiles at inappropriate times here. And that's just, that feeds so perfectly into Ramsay breaking his teeth and taking away a smile when you get to A Dance with Dragons. All these images of song and story and smiles and sex, they all corrupt and fade in Theon's arc. And yeah, we're going to get a lot more of that when we get to A Clash of Kings Theon 3.
Absolutely.
So that about wraps us up for foreshadowing and groundwork. Moving to our discussion portion. We here at the Nauticast generally love Theon's storyline in Season 2 of Game of Thrones. And that it's not exactly a contrarian position. It's one of the best parts of the show. But there are elements of tone and character that play very differently in that storyline than here in the books. And I think this chapter provides the perfect opportunity to talk about that. Because this scene plays very differently in Season 2 in a number of ways. Absolutely.
So this chapter is one that we said at the beginning of this episode was very much a jokey, kind of funny chapter of what Theon Greyjoy is experiencing and all the humiliation he's receiving at the butt end of being the joke of everything in this chapter. But it's seemingly in A Clash of Kings, excuse me, seemingly in Game of Thrones, the showrunners David Benioff, Dan Weiss, and these sort of writers that are associated with the show decided to change the tone a little bit, and they decided to make a much more somber tone for Theon. Think specifically about the scene where Theon has learned that his father plans to attack the north, and there's that wonderful, amazing scene where Theon burns the letter he's about to send to Robb Stark, warning Robb that Balon plans betrayal. That doesn't exist in A Clash of Kings. And this is not to say that one element of the story is better than the other, but rather it's to say that I think the show made an interesting and really good choice in terms of changing the adaptation, in terms of changing the tone. Gone are the jokes, and gone is the kind of Theon is a dumbass and he's getting his comeuppance, and was replaced by this kind of tone where it's sad, because ultimately Theon's story is sad. Now, again, like I was saying, that's not to say that I prefer one aspect of the story as opposed to the other, but it is to say that the tones are different. And I think it's an interesting way that George and David Benioff and Dan Weiss decided to show these different scenes.
I think it's interesting to note that really, we talk casually about Theon's arc being one of divided loyalties and caught between selves. It's bracing to come back and remember, oh right, in the books, Theon never worries about his loyalty to the Starks. Like that's never a concern in these first couple chapters. He doesn't think about the ramifications of switching sides and helping attack the North, even though he was at Robb's side. Like it doesn't occur to him how big a deal that is until it's already far too late. And I think that might translate better to the books than the show. I think the show, to get any kind of investment in Theon, you really have to make him a little more sympathetic from the start. You have to have him have a genuine love for the North and House Stark that he then sacrifices. In the books, it's not so much that he's caught between loyalties. It's just caught between two worlds in which he doesn't belong. It's not like in the show you get more the sense that like, oh, Theon gave up a life in the North he could have had. As he says later in season 3, I chose wrong. In the books, it's more there really is no good choice for Theon. He's really not welcome anywhere, and he never was going to be. And then the kind of intensity of the storyline is he still manages to find the worst choice, even from an array of bad choices. And yeah, that I think that was always going to work better in the books because you have George, doing this. He's trying to use a villain protagonist and make Theon's POV kind of feel like a cage you're in. And that flips so beautifully in A Dance with Dragons. Without the POV structure to guide you, I think they made the right decision to go in a different direction in the show.
Agreed. And I think the other thing, too, is we've talked about in our first Theon episode is that George retrofitted what was essentially supposed to be Tyrion's plotline of burning Winterfell onto Theon Greyjoy. So he didn't have a lot of the necessary build-up to make Theon the character that he turns out to be in A Clash of Kings. The showrunners had the ability of having A Clash of Kings in mind when they started to craft Theon Greyjoy. So we go back to season 1, we have everyone from Maester Luwin to Bran kind of mocking Theon and being like, and what's the line that Luwin says to Theon when he's out there shooting archery? He's like, and Theon's like bragging about, oh, we're great lovers. The Ironborn are amazing in these different things. And Maester Luwin's also really great at failing and losing at wars too. This all works really well to set up Theon's entry as a major character and major cast member come season 2. And I have to imagine that George, if he had the ability of hindsight in mind when he was writing Clash of Kings, maybe writing a Game of Thrones, foresight rather, that he would have maybe integrated a little bit more setup and groundwork for Theon's eventual turn, and maybe could have gone on a different, sadder type of tone. Another thing too, and this is also being brought up by several people in the comments here for our live casts, and we really appreciate everybody tuning in, of course, is that the music that he utilized for the Greyjoy scenes in the Iron Islands is sad. I mean, the tones of What Is Dead May Never Die is that track from season 2's official soundtrack that's just really sad. It's probably my favorite track from Game of Thrones, the show, and I think that also helps to set the tone. So I guess for those of you who are going to be going to adapt future novels and future books, you could play around with the tone. You can change the tone. You can make it thematically cognizant and thematically interesting and unique in your own way, and that's what you're supposed to. And I think that's to the credit of David Benioff and Dan Weiss in adapting and changing what was a pretty jokey, insulting, mocking tone for Theon's chapters in A Clash of Kings that George had. And
you follow the ripple effects of that outward. Like Yara in the show isn't joking and mocking Theon most of the time. She's actively angry at him in season 2 and thinks he has divided loyalties because the character in the show does. Whereas in the books, that's never really a question. It's not really that Asha considers that Theon might be a spy, like an asset for Robb Stark. It's more just you don't belong here. You're pathetic. Your attempts to make yourself belong here, are making you pathetic. And yeah, you don't get much peacock swagger from Theon in the show. And in part that's an effective casting that Alfie Allen just looks different from book Theon. So I think this is a case where it's a series of correct decisions given an overall framework. I think it's a great way to talk about the adaptational process because it's not one big change. It's a series of changes and then ripple effects that I think were followed through pretty well.
I absolutely agree. So I think that about wraps us up for this episode for A Clash of Kings Theon 2. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you for those of you who tuned in for the live cast for watching us. We will stick around for a bit afterwards to chat with you guys, answer questions, do all those things that some of you guys have said that you enjoy doing it. That some of those things that you guys enjoy watching and participating with us in. As always, if you have the chance, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NotaCastASOIAF. Follow us on Twitter at NotaCastASOIAF or shoot us an email at NotaCastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at Poor Quentin on Twitter or at poorquentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsofIceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon: Lord of the Squishers and Warden of the Deep, Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle, Septon Maribold, the Shoeless Sage, Lady Madeline Rivers, Justiciar of the Trident, Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood, Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North and Keeper of Secrets, Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson, Lady Britt, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal, Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood, Sir Tim the Knight who was guided by voices, Sir Courtenay, what did the five fingers say to the face Penrose, Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spear of Crescent Hill, Sir Way, of course, Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore, Lord Mark Connington, heir to Griffin's Roost, Lord Sam Kay, and Sir Michael Mertens. Thank you so much to all our high lords and ladies.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your support. So join us next week for Tyrion 6 as Tyrion bonds with Cersei over their joy at Renly and Stannis fighting each other. Only for Tyrion to poison his sister. Man, you gotta love all these healthy, respectful sibling relationships in A Clash of Kings.
Everyone's just getting along and skipping and holding hands, and it's all only going to get worse when Euron comes to town too, because all sibling relationships look jolly compared to Euron. So it's going to be fun to get back for another King's Landing chapter. You know, it's easy to get, you know, these Tyrion chapters might seem samey after a while, but this is a really good one.
It really, really is. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for those of you who have watched our live cast, and thank you to our Patreon supporters, and we will see you guys next week. All right. Bam. All right.
All right. Wonderful. Poor Theon. We've abandoned him to his fate.
Poor Theon. Sorry for taking your line from the first shadowing groundwork. I was just winging it. I was like, I feel like I almost had my eyes closed. I was just kind of looking up into like my wall behind the computer. And then I was like, fuck. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. So, folks in the chat, if you have any questions about this chapter or anything else, feel free to, as always, shoot them our way. Thanks so much for sticking around.
Absolutely. So Broken King asks, I know we have very little information, but what do you believe happened in the Third Blackfire Rebellion?
So this is the one we know about. The Egg did some deeds, and that his brother Brightflame did something horrible, right? That's
yeah. Was that the one also that Bittersteel got sent to the wall? Or was that the fourth one? I kind of get so they
and
start to
got
jumble
sent to
together.
the wall and escaped. I think it was the third one, and then he got sent to the wall because. From what we've been able to piece together, if I recall this correctly, it seems like what happened is that Brightflame did something so horrible that like Bittersteel couldn't be executed politically, like because like their side was already looking really bad because of what Brightflame did, and it's been suggested that Brightflame like might have murdered Haegon Blackfire, the Blackfire contender, after he already surrendered. But yeah, I imagine this is where Egg starts developing a reputation. From what's mentioned, this is, you know, I imagine there's a good Dunk and Egg war story to be found in this, you know, from their perspective. But yeah, Brightflame at the end seems to be the big event of this war, this particular rebellion.
Right, and I think like George has saved a lot of that information for future Dunk and Egg stories. I think he's got a couple ones in mind before he gets to the Third Blackfire Rebellion. He's got one set in Winterfell, another one set in the Riverlands apparently, and I guess from there we'll probably at some point get back to the Third Blackfire Rebellion. It's interesting to me how George kind of structures these Dunk and Egg stories and how he does riffs on common types of stories. He's done everything from the traditional fantasy epic from the Hedge Knight to the kind of Western almost feeling from the Sworn Sword to the kind of murder mystery type setting that's in the Mystery Knight, which I guess makes sense. It's called the Mystery Knight. I think that George will eventually do a war story set in the Third Blackfire Rebellion. He saved a lot of those reveals for that novella someday down the road. Very definitely in 2021 for sure is when that story is going to come out.
Well said, sir.
All right. Hold on. Sure. Yeah, we could do Travis's. All right. So Travis asks, Barbara Dustin sends enough troops and food with Robb to make it all seem like she's fully committed to the cause. Is she all in on Bruce, or is she hoarding resources and playing another game?
Well, I mean, Barbary, there's no even mention of her before Dance, right?
Right.
So I think it's fair to say that she's probably not in George's mind when you got the initial muster in the north and the initial moves down in the Riverlands with that army in the War of Five Kings. So with Barbary, you got to think George is coming up with her and giving her this much backstory for a purpose. I got to imagine she's going to outlive the Boltons, maybe throw her side to Sansa, or you know, try to manipulate one Stark because she doesn't like the Starks, but I can also see her trying to use one as her way back into power. She's, you know, I get the feeling with her that she's she's holding back and seeing how things play out in the North. If the Boltons win, she's their primary ally, but she's not hated or identified with them too strongly. She makes a deliberate connection between her and the other people who suffered at the Red Wedding. She makes it clear that she doesn't like the phrase. So you get the sense she's positioning herself as someone the North could consider a acceptable alternative. There's that moment in Dance when Barbie's laying out how Roose is securing power in the North. She says, who is there to oppose him? And Theon realizes, oh, wait, you could oppose him. And she gets very pleased and smug when he says that. So I get the feeling she may be positioning herself to take over in her own right, but also she doesn't want to lose above all.
Right. She has to play the game for the moment of siding with the Boltons because they're the power brokers in the North. But that's likely going to be changing here very early in the Winds of Winter as Stannis is going to wreck shit come the fray allies of the Boltons at the Battle of the Ice. And we'll likely see the Boltons' downfall thereafter. It's in some form, whether it's going to be through Stannis or through Stark sympathizers or the Starks themselves or Jon or someone like that. It remains to be seen. All right. Lord Micah, our Warden of the West, asked, my first question, we are intro to Wex in this chapter, and he has a big impact later. Think he was one of George's floating pieces for that? Could he appear later, maybe as a survivor at the end? Well, this is interesting. I think I happened to read Bran's final chapter in A Clash of Kings before we came on air, and you don't really get a sense that the Wex is there at any point in the Werewood.
That's a retcon for sure.
Absolutely retcon on George's part, but I mean it's kind of seamless, right? I mean because we're hashtag deep in the fandom, we know that that's most likely a retcon. The average reader's not going to see that. They're like, oh, there's a guy up in the tree the entire time watching everything and saw that Bran and Rickon and Osha and Hodor and the Reeds escaped. But yeah, I think George ended up utilizing him for something down the road because he does not actually. We don't actually learn his fate in Theon's final chapter, so George always had that in mind that he could utilize it at some point down the road. Will he appear later? It's possible. I think I'm not sure in what capacity he would appeal. He would appear with Wyman Manderley or the Glovers or Robert Glover. It's unclear to me how he might come back in the story. Do you think there's a way he could come back in the story?
It's not. We don't know whether he was sent with Davos or not. There's no real reason for him to be, but I could see just for story purposes and wanting to give Davos someone to talk to. George might send him off with Davos to fetch Rickon, and so he'll be involved whenever that quest goes. It would be nice if he linked back up with Theon and Asha, because he's here at the start of their story. It would make a certain circular, pleasingness if he was there when they go back to the Iron Islands. So maybe he'll contrive to that. I don't think he's going to be any more than a supporting character, and I think, he came back when George reworked and rewrote this whole Davos Manderley's Rickon plot after the death of the 5-year gap. But now that he's there, I imagine he'll just, he'll contribute. He'll be on the side. He's like Val. He's kind of an ascended expert in that way,
Absolutely. I love that term, ascended expert. That's great. All right. Lady Erin M., one of our patrons, asks, do you think it's sort of a bridge too far to have Balon Greyjoy, Idiot Lord, and Big Buyer into the misogynist culture consider his female child as his heir? That's a good question. What do you think?
I mean, if he had any other alternative, she wouldn't be there. It's not just because his sons died or were taken off to Winterfell. It's because the next brother down the line is a freaking maniac who wants to end the world. If Victarion was older than Euron, I wonder if he might be the heir instead of Asha. But because Euron is next in line, Balon doesn't want to go anywhere near that possibility. So I think he went all in on Asha. And even at that point, Asha has had to perform Ironborn masculinity constantly, and it's constantly a question, and she does deal with misogynistic pushback when she gets to A Feast for Crows. I think for the most part it was just no one wants to piss off Big Daddy Balon, but I wonder if even if he had died in different circumstances, even if there was no Euron returning, even if there was no Kingsmoot, I think Asha might have had trouble consolidating power.
Agreed. I think what you're saying specifically about her doing performative masculinity is key to why Balon recognizes her as heir despite his seeming buy-in to the misogynist culture that he's a part of, he's leading. I think part of it too is that Balon at any single point never considered Theon to be his heir. Aaron is going to make that explicit in A Feast for Crows, and again, like you were saying in the main cast for the Winds of Winter, Aaron is going to remember Balon thinking of Asha as his beloved favorite child. I do think that there is a exclusionary aspect that Asha was the only one left to Balon, so he ended up projecting all of the different traits that he wanted to see in his heir through Asha, and also maybe not totally seeing through her. And also, again, that question still comes up to my mind, how was she able to attain these leadership qualities when there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of people in her life outside of Roderick the Reader, I guess, who really has any really sense of goodness about them whatsoever.
That might be why Roderick the Reader was invented as a character, to kind of try, when Asha becomes a POV, George might have felt the need, okay, to explain like how she has good influences, how she didn't just turn out like Balon. As he starts to make her a more sympathetic character, maybe he said, oh, I got to come up with a mentor figure who can like embody this good side of Asha, and that's why the Reader exists. Because again, as with Barbary Dustin, I don't think Lord Roderick Harlaw is so much as mentioned before he shows up in the Feast for Crows.
Absolutely. And speaking of Roderick the Reader, Joe Magician, aka Joe the Magician, asks, one thing that's always caught my attention is that Roderick the Reader managed to embarrass Euron in the Shield Islands. Was he doing a similar role to Balon?
Well, again, I don't think Roderick even exists in George's mind at this point, but if we're just gonna like kind of grandfather him in, from what he seems like in the Feast for Crows, Roderick seems to be like, you know, playing you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone with the Greyjoys. Like he runs his own little fiefdom on Harlaw and is just kind of dismayed with his in-laws. So I've theorized before that maybe Roderick the Reader was more in like Quellon's camp, was more in the new way politically. And then when he kind of saw the writing on the wall when Balon replaced Quellon. And but it is interesting to consider because there is that marriage alliance that Balon has with House Harlaw, despite Roderick the Reader seeming politically opposite to him. So this isn't an area that's been explored and probably will not be, but it is interesting to consider because you'd think they'd be aimed directly at each other. And Roderick the Reader, yeah, he seems kind of aware that Euron is a break from tradition, but also kind of not. No one, even the people on the Iron Islands who are suspicious of Euron, no one but Dampere really has a sense of how wrong things have gone with him. So Roderick might think he's just dealing with another Balon, yeah.
Yeah, I could see that too. And it's also one of those fabulous elements where Roderick is the one who's be like, have you actually been to Valyria? Have you actually done these
so
things?
softly? It's great, yeah.
Right, and it just undercuts all of Euron's assumed swaggering style. That yeah, it's awesome. Another question from Micah. On track with the other live casts, how is Theon's supporting cast, and how great do they add to his story, a la Jon's, Dany's, or Arya's? This is a good question. In terms of his supporting characters, the one that I always gravitate, well, the two that I always gravitate to is Dagmar Cleftjaw, which is a really interesting character because, as we were saying in Theon's first chapter, he is the one Ironborn character that doesn't immediately dismiss Theon as an idiot and actually seemingly is friendly with Theon, doesn't, you know, have a sense of hostility towards the kid. And part of that is because he knew him as a kid and had watched him take his first steps, as he's going to say in Theon's third chapter. He's an interesting one. Reek, that's a really or Ramsay rather, that's a much different equation when it comes to the supporting characters. I guess we're going for Clash of Kings supporting characters because it's much more expansive. Come a Dance with Dragons, where you've got everyone from Lady Dustin, Mance Rayder, the Spearwives, the Frey boys as well. It's much more interesting. I think that on a whole, I think it's probably a bit better than Dany's, not as good as Jon's. I think that's probably okay. That's probably where I come down in terms of supporting characters and how great they are to the story.
I think Theon has one of the better supporting casts. They're not even always great individual characters, but they always relate to his struggle really well. Like they get that with Ramsay, especially disguising himself as Reek as first and then turning Theon into Reek. That's just brilliant, and that's played out so well. Dagmar, as you say. I like the Barbary Dustin and his story a lot. They get a lot of great scenes. Yeah, Theon's got really good supporting characters, and that's only going to ramp up in the Winds of Winter because now he's in Stannis' camp. You get that great Theon chapter that's released from the Winds of Winter, which is a Theon chapter, but it may as well be called the Stannis chapter. It's just like a highlight reel. So yeah, I always enjoy Theon's chapters for that.
Absolutely. Do you know anything about the Jacobite Rebellion? Because I don't. Lady
I do
Matt.
not. Sadly, Maddie, sorry. As usual, I don't know enough history to make you happy.
Yeah, sorry, Maddie. I don't know enough about the Scottish history as well. I'm sorry to say. I'm just.
We'd be happy to hear what you have to say about it. But
yeah, absolutely.
That's all we got.
Leave some comments. All right. Joe Schmo 725 asked, do you think Theon would have been taken more seriously if he showed up with a section or platoon or troops or with some other Northern High Lords?
They'd be killed on sight unless he was very, very careful about it. Like, again, that's what we said would be the problem with, like, if Rob had actually sent Jason Mallister or someone else to negotiate with Balon. Like, Balon is preparing to go to war already. So if Theon gets off the boat with a bunch of soldiers, man, I have difficulty imagining what Balon would do. What do you think he would do?
Probably send all the Reavers that he had on hand to go massacre the motherfucking bejesus out of them. I think that seems in line with who Balon Greyjoy is, and especially if they said the Malishers, man, that would have been
that's just salt in the wound.
Right. I mean, like, what was it? Marin or Roderick? Roderick was the one that was killed at Seaguard, right?
Yep.
Pretty sure.
Yep.
And yeah, so we're gonna send the noble lords that actually killed Balon's son to Pike. That seems like a very, very bad idea on the part of them. But I you know, there's a sense of like always show up with an entourage and these types of things.
The trappings of power, I get that, but that would only work in a situation in which Balon is in a position to be impressed or whatever, negotiate with the Northerners. And there's just, the trappings of power went up against limits when you're dealing with someone who isn't impressed by your version of power and wants no part in it. So I get to see how that would be technically better, but I think the result would be the same, if not worse.
Agreed there. Another Balon question. Do you think Balon started planning his invasion of the North when Ned rode south to be the Hand? That's a good question. I think
part of me thinks Balon started planning this invasion the second Ned and Robert left. The second his first rebellion ended, he's been planning the second one. I think specifically attacking the North. I think Rob going south was the moment he went like, yeah, this is the chance, this is the opportunity. I think that's probably when he called the banners, because when Theon shows up, the ships were already there. So my guess is not so much Ned going south to be the Hand. I don't think that's the signal that things are about to go wrong. Who knows if Balon even knew about that? But Rob going south with the army, I think that was the big moment for Balon, would be my guess.
Right, and in this chapter 2, it's referenced in the feast that not all of the Ironborn are quite there at Pike yet, ready to depart. They're departing in a fortnight, which to me reads that it's been a little bit sooner than Ned heading south for Balon to actually plan and launch the invasion of the North. All right, here's a good one from Just Reds. You guys think Victarion and Stannis will meet again, possibly as allies through the Red Priests?
That would be fun since they're the same person. But I don't. I mean, they're such different theaters. I don't think Stannis is ever getting out of the North. I don't think Victarion is making it back from the East. Even if Victarion does make it back from the East, he has no reason to head north. So no, I think kind of the point with Stannis and Victarion is that they are so similar, but on complete different sides of the world. Like you have the sacrifice, the Asha chapter, in which Stannis burns people alive, and then the next chapter is a Victarion chapter in which he's burning a bunch of people alive. So those are definitely deliberate parallels, but I think they're meant to be the version of each other at the opposite ends of the world, if that makes sense.
It does. It really, really does. JM asks, where do you see Alanis's role in the story of Asha and Theon going? Okay.
Not much, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think like Theon avoids going to see her, and then Asha in the Feast for Crows avoids going to see her. I mean, that's her role essentially, is to be the avoided being seen apparently by all the POV characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, and likely that will be the same going forward. Although I could see her possibly showing up in the theorized second Kingsmoot that might occur when Asha brings Theon back potentially to the Iron Islands. That could be what happens, but I guess we'll have to see.
You know, one trope that George doesn't break in fantasy is that a lot of the mothers are off screen or dead, or conveniently claustrophobic and don't want to talk to or interact with anybody. And you see that in a lot of different characters across the story. And yeah, it is so brutal how Theon doesn't visit her. Like, another situation in which the show Theon is more sympathetic, because I don't think that even comes up in the show.
Mm-mm.
But like, he doesn't, and there's really no reason he doesn't go see her other than like, oh, intimacy, oh, like having to talk to another human being like an equal. I can't be having that. The only way he can relate to women is wanting to fuck them. He can't possibly talk to his mother like a human being. And then you get that little heartbreaking bit of it in A Feast for Crows. But I think she's mostly just there as kind of a prop to stand in for the idea of despair. I don't think unfortunately there's much to her as a character, but I could be wrong. We'll see.
I think you're sadly correct. Max L asks, what is George's endgame for the Greyjoys? Of the great houses, they certainly rival the Lannisters for the most depraved. Will we see most of them gone by story's end?
Hope so.
Yeah, most of them are going to fucking die. I mean, Victarion, Aaron,
Euron eventually.
If at some point. Theon, I think the show's version of Theon's death is going to be pretty similar to what we're going to see in the books. I think Theon does return to Winterfell at some level, possibly, maybe, I don't know. I think Asha is going to survive. I think she'll probably be the only point of view character to survive. I mean, the end game for the Greyjoys is hopefully Euron buying it, hopefully the old way dying off, hopefully the new way maybe taking on some resumed semblance of power in the Iron Islands. I think could be it. But again, it's one of those things where I always ask myself this question when I'm thinking about like end games and how theories are going to play out, is how much space is George going to devote to the
Sure.
Iron Island storyline when he's got so many other storylines,
So many
seemingly
big ones. Yeah.
right, that he's got to deal with? But I'm sure it'll take at least something, a little bit of page space in Dream of Spring about the end game.
A chapter or two about Asha freeing the thralls or something. I could absolutely see that. But yeah, the older generation is definitely going to all bite the dust one after another. I think you can see that. And then they'll leave the door open for Asha and Theon.
Absolutely. All right, Joe the Magician asks, do you two think that Theon has an heir on the captain's daughter? If so, will it matter?
Right. This one's confusing for me because you also have Asha potentially being pregnant in A Dance with Dragons by Carl. And not to be like you can't have two babies in a storyline, because clearly you can. But part of me feels like those two potential babies seem like they're auditioning for the same role, namely the next generation of Greyjoy leadership, especially because Theon is now castrated. So I wonder if, like, was it originally the plan for Theon to impregnate the captain's daughter and that to emerge as his heir, but then things got changed with the 5-year gap or something else, and now maybe it's Asha's kid? Or maybe both, or maybe the captain's daughter or child ends up just being proof of Theon's masculinity or some such nonsense. I do agree that, like, the seed, so to speak, seems to be there with Theon and Clash.
Seed, huh? The seed.
But also Asha's pregnancy is much stronger hinted at in A Dance with Dragons, so I'm conflicted on this count. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was our major end discussion theory for our first Theon chapter. So I think we had both come up with just independent of us, like actually writing in the notes, we had come up with this idea that maybe Asha is going to claim that her child that she brings from the union between her and Carl the Maid might pass that off as Theon's child possibly, and
that would make sense, yeah.
Which, I mean, is something that George has integrated in A Song of Ice and Fire many times at this point.
That's true. Good point.
All right. So we've got there's a question about, I'm trying to find it. There we go. Joshmo asks, is Cersei going to marry Euron?
Look, that's not Euron in the show, guys. That's just not him in any way, shape, or form. And, like, I get, like, you see a woman with Euron in the Forsaken visions, and maybe that could be Cersei. I do get that. But, like, what does Cersei have that Euron would want? Euron does not care about riches. Euron does not care about land. Like, he uses these as bait for his followers. Euron cares about, like, apocalyptic power that makes the third eye in his brain feel bigger and stronger than everyone else's. Cersei brings nothing to the table for that. And Euron in the Forsaken, as you can see, he's getting very, very close to the point where he's not even going to pretend to be, like, a normal political authority anymore. Like, he's about to openly embrace his true monstrous nature. I just don't see what Cersei offers. I see why Cersei might want herself a powerful, monstrous ally. But honestly, I think the person we might see, maybe not hooking up with Euron, but considering it, is Dany. Because Euron is very much her type, if you look at Drogo and Dario. And Euron is of course, actively after Dany, which he's not at all in the show. So it's possible, but I really doubt it.
I am with you in that camp. I don't think that Euron and Cersei are going to get together. I think that this is one of those areas that, George did when he was talking about the end of the show, is like, as what we saw in the show going to happen in the books. It's like, yes and no, and yes and no, and yes and no, and yes and no. I think this is firmly in the no side of things, of things that was a major plot point in Game of Thrones. I don't think this is going to end up happening in the books. But, I guess we'll have to see. Maybe, possibly. We'll see. All right. Travis M. asks, give us a preview of your next Patreon episode about banners and sigils. What's your favorite one?
Oh, gee. I mean, it's got to be Euron's. Like, not to jump back to Euron, but, like, he lays his entire backstory on his banner, and, like, no one gets it, and that's the great joke for him. Like, his banner is literally, my third eye was opened by Bloodraven, and that's why I'm in charge. And I do love that aspect of it. But there's so many great ones. Like, I love Davos's. That the ship and the onion is wonderful, and there's just some silly ones like the naked woman of Pink Maiden that they make fun of at some point. I always enjoy the sigil talk because there's always something interesting going on, or just a nice little joke.
So my favorite one is Aegor Rivers at his Bittersteel's personal sigil, which is
good one. Yep.
And I'm reading this directly from the wiki, so I did a little research before we put this question on air. His personal arms, he combines the red stallion of House Bracken with black dragon wings from House Blackfire on a golden field. It's a badass sigil. And I think that George, you can imagine George being the type of guy who loves sigils and heraldry of deciding that this was going to be what drove him to creating the character of Bittersteel, of having the sigil first and then developing the character right afterwards. So I think that's my personal favorite one. I do love, of course, Brennan Blackfish. I love that kind of inversion of major houses in terms of whether it's the Blackfish sigil of the Blackfish or the Black Dragon in terms of the Blackfires of inverting the Targaryen colors. I think that's really, really cool. I think that's we're something I'll be talking about the episode is about how like the black sheep of the family, so to speak, or the black side of the black sheep of a family ends up creating sigils that often are reflecting that kind of black sheep status in the story. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Okay. Max asks, what the fuck is Cersei gonna end up doing in Dream? Because I feel like she ain't gonna get often-wins.
I mean, yeah, obviously, who knows how long these character arcs will go within the space of one book. George had to cut off at the end of Dance earlier than he wanted to, and that has had ripple effects, I'm sure, on constructing wins in Dream. I always felt like if there is a big climactic death in Wins, it would be Cersei. That makes sense to me in terms of like, you got Jaime eventually dealing with his Riverlands plots. You got young Griff moving up. You got Dany eventually coming in from Westeros. You got a off the Cersei plot eventually. It's possible that she like runs to Casterly Rock. We've theorized about that before, but the more I think about it, the more I think that Cersei might that whole plot line might reach its climax within the space of Winds of Winter.
I can see that. I mean, I really like the idea of Cersei assuming kind of the Saruman role from Lord of the Rings, of going back to the Westerlands after she's been dethroned from her power, and then coming back as a minor annoyance at the end of the story and having that kind of scouring of the Shire type scene we saw at the end of Return of the King. Possibly, maybe she goes and tries to stir shit up in the Riverlands again one more time, burning her way through the Riverlands, and everyone comes out and stops her, or Jaime kills her, or something like that. I don't know. We'll end up seeing. I think I do. I'm with you in that Cersei might end up dying in the Winds of Winter, which is, I don't want to sound so sad about it, but she is such a compelling, interesting, fucking crazy character. I mean, I love that aspect of her, and it's going to be sad to see her gone. We're not going to have that type of crazy anymore. It's going to be replaced by other crazies like Euron, but it's just kind of a different type of crazy than Cersei.
For sure. And as people are saying in the chat, Euron does seem to fill the Saruman role in a number of ways. Sure. And I wonder if the Shire scouring might ultimately belong to him in the books. But Cersei, I mean, I think the associations with her and Wildfire are so strong, and Wildfire is only in King's Landing. So, I mean, not only in King's Landing, but it's not in the Westerlands. So I think it's got to have something to do with that. I could see Jaime coming back to King's Landing and killing her. The show, I think, extended Cersei past her sell-by date. So there's a lot of potential confusion about where that goes.
Agreed there. All right, Joe Magician asks, Aaron is known for his amazing skill at pissing, and his ship is named the Golden Storm. Euron's name sounds a bit like urine. What's up with the Ironborn and peeing?
I mean, I just think maybe it's just another way of establishing that everything is just kind of gross and damp on the Iron Islands. But George, this whole chapter we just did is entirely composed of dick jokes, and there's nothing inherently simplistic about crude humor. I think you can use it as a way to tap into a lot of insecurities. But the joke of Euron's name, I think, is ultimately suggests, of course, that Euron is a pretender and that everything he does will ultimately amount to piss, so to speak. I think that might be what George is going for there.
Yeah, it's similar to Tywin's legacy being shit at the end.
Exactly right. Right. That's a great comparison. Yep.
All right. Moist. Some moist Tony 3483 says. Excellent.
Everything is very moist on the Iron Islands. True. Do a couple more.
Yeah, we'll probably go to. Do you think good to go to 10:30 or so, and then we'll we'll wrap it up for the night.
Absolutely.
Pat D talks about the Frey sigils, which we will talk about in the episode itself. The Frey sigils, they get crazy. 19 houses, one shield. LOL.
Yes, absolutely.
It's great. Freys are awesome. Well, they're not awesome, but their sigils are fun. Question from Micah, our War of the West. What if Qyburn is the worm tongue to Euron Saruman?
Again, I could see like Qyburn and Euron getting along just fine, but they're in just such different theaters. I think Qyburn is ride or die for Cersei, as he was in the show. Euron really doesn't need help. And I don't think he wants any, really. Like, I mean, other than like a perfect partner in Daenerys that he thinks of anyway. Euron's his own mad scientist. You know what I mean? Like, he's already read all the books that Qyburn has. I don't think he needs assistance.
I mean, he doesn't need a necromancer. He's a necromancer himself, right? I mean,
exactly. Well, yeah, Qyburn is redundant. His resume will not be kept on file.
Agreed there. All right, Lady Aaron M asked, did either of you watch The Witcher? We were talking about this last week before we actually even recorded our patron only episode about the mini episode. I watched about the first 10, 15 minutes, but there was the scene in the first episode where there was a bunch of naked women in that one tall building, and I was like, this doesn't seem like it's for me. But I've heard really good things, like it really picks up and it's awesome, and I should watch it again. And maybe I will. I just finished The Mandalorian. I'm watching season 2 of Succession. I'm watching a Norwegian show about the commies taking over. It's very erudite and intellectual.
How highfalutin.
I know. Right? Great.
I've watched bits and pieces of the first episode. It hasn't hooked me yet. It could potentially. The tone is not for me so far, but I could easily get more hooked into the story as I go. I'm only half familiar with all the lore surrounding the franchise. I don't know if it would help more if I was more familiar with it, possibly.
Did you play the games or read the novels or not?
I had friends who played the games, and I occasionally joined in and watched some of it sometimes, but was not deeply invested in it.
I'm right there with you. I tried to play, I think, the third Witcher. Actually, I tried to play all of them, and I just got bored, and I set them aside. I'm also an adult, and I don't have time for video games. I'm a real adult. I podcast.
But of course, much fancier.
Jay asks, how fitting would Euron drowning at the bottom of the sea in his treasured armor be? Well, I mean, there's that line from Victorian, right? Is he's jumping aboard ships in full armor because he's very brave. A fucking idiot, both at the same time. If Euron being in his Valyrian steel armor would be drowning at the bottom of the sea would be interesting, I guess.
I could definitely see that. That fits with everything that Euron thinks is going to empower him. All his magical artifacts end up literally weighing him down. That would be great. The only thing gives me pause there is that Jon has that dream in A Dance with Dragons, his 12th chapter, which the Girls Gone Canon are recording right now, actually. About he's armored in black ice, which a lot of people have said that sounds like Valyrian steel armor. And now that we have the Forsaken, maybe Jon somehow gets his hands on that suit of armor. So then Euron maybe wouldn't get drowned in it. But, that could be easily another suit of armor, or it could just speaking metaphorically to Jon's Targaryen roots. So there is something that tickles my fancy about Euron going down. Maybe in the God's Eye, we talked about Euron potentially dying there before, playing the Aemond role from the Dance of the Dragons. So I would like that a lot.
Yeah, it'd be nice. But I think, for me personally, I think that Euron's end game is going to be at the business end of Dany's Dragonfire. But we'll see come.
That would also be lovely.
That would also be nice too. All right, few more questions, few more comments. Scrolling through. Everybody's talking about The Witcher, which is great. Which I guess that's fine. Joe says The Witcher is confusing.
I gather.
Yeah. Everybody says that I'm claiming that I love the phrase, which is not true.
Well, now it's canon, Jeff.
It's not canon. All right, Max S. Is there enough foreshadowing to establish what the Dragonhorn actually will do, or has George kept it mysterious enough that we can't guess at it?
Dragonbinder has so many contradictory ideas surrounding it, because we haven't seen it work on a dragon, but Dany does mention in Dance with Dragons that the first Valyrians bound dragons with sorcerer's horns, and it had a huge kind of mesmeric impact at the Kingsmoot, but it killed the dude blowing it. And now Victorian has it, but he's kind of handing it over to some slaves, but also he kind of wants to blow it himself. And both the dragons are out, but Makuro did a thing to the horn, but what's the dust movement? I think definitely the latter is what I'm saying. There was so many confusing, contradictory ideas surrounding Dragonbinder. I think it could do everything from binding a dragon to Euron immediately and permanently to nothing. It might do nothing at all. And I think all of those are equally possible. And I think George wants us to not know for sure. Maybe when he first started coming up with it, he wanted to keep it open because he didn't know for sure. This is one of the areas where I see foreshadowing in so many directions.
Yeah, I can see many things happening when the Dragonhorn is sounded, which is going to be, I believe, probably the climax of the Battle of Fire, come early in the Winds of Winter. A little bit of trivia for you guys. Actually, if you read a World of Ice and Fire app, if you have that on your phones, you can actually find out that the horn's origination comes from Karth. Yes, our favorite location in the Song of Ice and Fire, Karth. The Warlocks apparently brought the Dragonhorn, seemingly in an attempt to bind Dany's dragons to them, and then Euron seemingly intercepted them. I don't know, maybe some sort of Eurothon Nightwalker showed up. Who knows? Who can say? So I've had this idea for a little while now that the Dragonhorn is already bound to Euron Greyjoy via maybe he utilized the blood of the Warlocks in order to do that. And then Victorion's kind of rubbing his own blood into the horn is not going to do fuck all, which is going to be hilarious when he blows the horn, because I think Victoria is absolutely going to blow that horn.
Oh, agreed there for sure.
Yeah, and that Victorian wins a winner sample chapter. He's like, "Oh, my horn, my dragons." He's like chanting at it. It's like
jealous of the slaves that he's like telling to do it. Yeah, it stands out for sure.
It's hilarious. It's going to be so much fun. All right, let's do one more, and then we'll sign off for the night, and we will talk to you guys. And we'll talk to you guys obviously 2 weeks from now. If you guys are watching this live, you can also listen to our regular podcast episode. We'll have our next live cast next month, of course. So thank you again for getting us to our Patreon level that allows us to do these monthly live cast episodes.
Absolutely.
All right. Lewis Robertson asks, I know you guys rag on Karth and fairly, but I quite like it as a place in theory and occurring in the lore rather than its role in Dany's story.
In theory is a great way of putting it, Lewis. Yeah, I like Karth in theory. It's a fascinating idea of a location, and there's so much great imagery and intrigue surrounding it, but just nothing happens. Like Dany goes there, and like it's like, oh, she tries to bribe some people, and it doesn't work. So she goes to the wizards, and that doesn't work. So she goes, huh, interesting, and then she leaves. So like, but like all the great descriptions of like, you know, like there's these phantom tortoises and this people going mad and these strange bazaars and like gates like molting snakes. It's like it's all beautiful. You can imagine a great story being told there. Part of me wonders whether it might have been better if Euron had contrived to show up at that point in the story and like been the villain of Dany's Carthene storyline as like a way of teasing him. But it, you know, he was very early in the conception stage at that point. So yeah, I like it in lore. I like it in history. I like thinking about all the influences George is drawing from because there's a lot of interesting influences in Karth. But when you like make your way past all that to the story, there's just not much there.
Yeah, I mean, Dany's chapters in Clash are her weakest of any of her arcs because George had to essentially put her story on hold, or at least on like it. What I've compared Dany's story in Clash of Kings specifically to is that running on a treadmill, right? It always seems like that there's lots of effort being put in for Dany's storyline, but Karth really exists because the rest of the story in Westeros was not moving at the same pace that Dany's story was. Because Dany's story by and large ends at the point that George originally wanted to end a Game of Thrones. And if we remember crazily, George intended for the first book to end with the Red Wedding of all things. Oh my God, how is that possible? Who knows? But that ended up being not the case. So Dany got put on ice, and Karth, her story got put on ice on a treadmill. Whatever, use whatever metaphor you want to use.
I like that.
Yeah, whatever. Ice on a treadmill. Yeah. So I'm with you. Karth is not super interesting to me. I don't find the characters all that compelling. I dare you to tell me a single interesting thing about Pyat Pree or about anyone in Karth besides Dany herself and Jorah and Arstan Whitebeard, aka Barristan. Basically, anyone who's not from Karth is more interesting than the people in Karth itself. So we'll see.
I will have a lot to say about the ways in which it doesn't work for me. So if you're hoping that Daenerys 2 episode is going to be shorter than our recent episodes, sorry to disappoint you. I have many levels of disappointment with Karth, and I'm going to make you sit for all of them.
I can't wait to hear those levels of disappointment. It's going to be so much fun. So I think that about wraps us up for this live cast now. We hope you guys have appreciated it and enjoyed it. We've really enjoyed interacting with you guys. Thank you guys very much for supporting us. I know a number of you guys who are in our chat are our patrons. We really, really appreciate your support. Thank you for listening to us now. We're closing in on 100 episodes, which is really, really awesome.
Yes.
It's really cool. We're going to be at 100 episodes by the middle of February, I want to say, probably. Which is going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to finish Clash before the end of this year, which is crazy. It'll coincide right with the release for the Winds of Winter.
Really smart marketing on our point. Always good branding as usual. But yeah, thanks so much for hanging out in the chat, folks. We always appreciate it. And we will see you here for our next live stream next month.
See you guys soon.